Hello everybody, welcome to the stream. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Let's make sure that my audio is where it needs to be before we really get into the meat and potatoes of the stream. Sort of a basic overview for what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at some of the new factions. We're going to be discussing the new features. I'm sure many people are going to have questions about campaign, and I am absolutely prepared to answer as many of those as I possibly can. I have a lot of new information that I didn't have in the last stream regarding certain sub-factions. One of the big ones to talk about today is Dorthonion. That's going to be led by the Brothers of Finarfin, so they will be closely linked to House Finarfin. And there are some other interesting campaign details that we can talk about a little bit today as well. It's looking like my audio levels are pretty good. I think everyone will be able to hear me just fine. How's it going there? SAJ Music Works. That's hard to say quickly and easily. Hello, Metallic. Love this mod. The older days are the best. Thank you very much, Jason Peterson. The new patch is out. I'm not sure if that was clear from the title of this video or not, but I do have the patch out, and I will be also running some multiplayer games once we get through the discussion. So we're going to play a few multiplayer games, and then it's back to campaign development for me, because today is actually my day off, so I will be sitting down with the dev team. We'll be going over even more things. And I will be updating the channel periodically. There's Stewart of Dale. Welcome to the stream, my guy. All right. I think there's enough people in here. We can go ahead and we can get this started. Feel free to pop your questions into the chat as I talk. We're going to be taking a look at the new factions. The first one we're going to start with is Nandangortha. So we're going to take a look at all of their units in game. I'm going to talk a little bit about the faction concept, where we got the idea from, why we decided to go in that direction. Let's go ahead and let's change to one of our different maps here. Sindarin Countryside might be fun. We can go ahead and do that. And then we'll take a look at one of the other kind of factions as well. I believe these two are added around the same time, so we'll do Nandangortha and we'll do the Avari as well. That should be good. Alrighty, Sindarin Countryside. So let's line up the Skirmishers for Nan. We'll line up their light infantry. They're very limited heavy infantry. Fast movers will go over here. And yes, they do have spider riders. And there are some there's some discussion we could actually have a little bit about Nan today in terms of some of the mechanics you may see in the future. Let's go with my Urish Abomination, who is an abomination in more than just name, because his UVs were tragically ruined by a converter, and I haven't been able to fix them yet. There we are. And so we'll go into the monstrous infantry as well. First, let's check and see if we have any questions before we begin. Everyone can hear me? Perfect. Let's roll. So, Nandangortha. It's a faction of predominantly light infantry. The concept that I wanted to play with when we decided to bring this faction in, or rather, I sort of unilaterally decided that I wanted to do this while I was out on a camping trip in the middle of the woods, is an orcish faction that is actually pretty decent at skirmishing. So you're going to see some pretty tough long and short range, or mid-range rather, skirmishers from Nandangortha. They've got a lot of light infantry. Many of them are absolutely fearless, living in the Valley of Dreadful Death. Certainly takes stones above and beyond the average orc, and it's definitely reflected in their units. So the Elves of Mithrim orcs, it is basically a simplification of a Valarin name, which it means simply just means marred, and marred being something that's imperfect, something that's flawed. And I can think of really no better name. A lot of light infantry here. In the case of the Elves of Mithrim Fleshed Airs, they are medium, but the rest of them will be light. They're utterly fearless, so they have lock morale. They've got really good damage values, so if we want to take a look at things here. They've got solid damage values, definitely pushing into that like high or like upper mid-tier damage values. A lot of the Doriath elves are going to have around that. They've got really high charge bonus. They are locked morale. They can hide in the woods. They get combat bonuses in the woods, which is wonderful for them. But of course their armor and their defense and their shield are quite low. So these are the kind of units that are really just there to tar pit for you, bog other units down, get in the way, and allow some of your larger and more important units, such as your cavalry or your monsters, to kind of just do their thing across the battlefield. Over here we have a similar concept, but something with a little bit more bite to it. Elves of Mithrim Skull Splitters. They've got obviously no shield. They've got a little bit better defense from the lack of the shield, and of course they've got about 3 armor there as well. Now they will eventually have a model to reflect that, but we had some more converter issues which stopped me from being able to put that into this patch. But yeah, so they've got a little bit less armor. They have throwing axes, a couple of them, which can deal a fairly decent amount of damage. And if you look at their missile attack there, yeah, they can do 10. They've got a melee attack of 13, which is enormous for a low tier unit. And essentially all of the Elves of Mithrim units are low tier. They've got a brutal charge value of 20, so they can trade extremely well off the charge. That being said, they're a little bit less numerous than their shielded counterparts, and that's to sort of stop those missiles from just being absolutely ridiculous in multiplayer. And recruitment costs of about 600. They are also lock morale, so you need to kill every single one of these guys in order to get rid of them. Let's move on to their heavy infantry here, which also happens to be their bodyguard unit, and basically the only, I would say, only bodyguard option really that's unmounted that the orcs of Nandangortha have available to them. Now they've got some pretty hefty armor, mostly scavenged from people who are foolish enough to wander in to the Valley of Dreadful Death and who unfortunately never again walk out. You can upgrade their armor. They've got fearsome stats as well as being relentless, but unlike many of the other Nandangortha orcs, they're not exactly mindless. They do have a sense of self-preservation, so it is possible to rout this unit. That being said, it's not easy. They have about 19 or 20 morale, not the hugest defense skill, and they've got a 10 armor base, which you can upgrade to 12, but they have brutal damage values, really high charge value. And of course, they are relentless. And for those of you unfamiliar with the Silmarillion nomenclature, basically, relentless just means that their animation set has had its flinching animation removed. So when they get hit, they simply don't flinch, they just attack more often and deal damage more often. It is also helpful for pushing into to units that rely on knockback, like monsters, for example, or pole arms and things like that. So they're particularly nice against like pikes. So that's an option there for when Nandangortha gets into a scrum with some faction that uses a lot of pole arms. They are extremely expensive as well. You do pay sort of the troll toll for being able to bring a unit outside of your overall specialization, that being heavy infantry, so they do cost a little bit extra as well. Yeah, let's move on now to their skirmishers. We have the Dwarves of Mithrim Predators, and they're a species of harassment javelin. So, little breakdown here on the Silmarillion skirmish types. We have various types of javelins. Some are better for hurting monsters, and they have a little bit less range and ammunition as a result. And some are better at just harassing large infantry formations. Light infantry, medium infantry doesn't really do a ton against heavy infantry or well-shielded infantry from the front. But this is a harassment javelin unit, so you can see they've got that lower missile value. So at 2, it is armor piercing. And they've got a decent melee attack as well, and a decent charge bonus to boot. Not a ton of armor. They are shielded, which is nice, but they are not locked morale. That's one of the big differences here. So they have a lot of the same bonuses that the Dwarves of Mithrim Flesh Terrors will have, but there's less of them. They're not locked morale, and their overall combat stats are a little bit lower, as is generally the case for skirmishers and Silmarillion. You don't want them to eclipse infantry in their respective roles. Next, we have the Dwarves of Mithrim Beast Hunters. Now, one of the important things to note about Nandangortha is that they don't really have traditional spearmen. Their archers, in many different ways, are their spearmen. So they have a spider-mounted version of this unit as well. And, of course, they have these guys. So the Dwarves of Mithrim Beast Hunters are... they have bonuses versus cavalry. Quite sizable bonuses as well. They do a decent amount of damage. They've got a good charge bonus. Not your traditional counter, but it does compensate somewhat in a fairly, I feel, flavorful way. It just contributes to the overall sense of Nandangortha being a little bit different than some of the other factions. They are, however, unshielded and light, so they will die in droves. But you can actually bring quite a lot of them, and there's many of them in a unit. I think they are the largest archer unit. Don't quote me on that. They might be slightly smaller than perhaps some of the Angband Thralls, but you can certainly bring more of them. And this is sort of that linchpin of where Nandangortha kind of comes into their own and differentiates themselves from factions like Nandangortha or Angband, things like that. They can bring a crap ton of archers, and they can bring a crap ton of really nice supporting units. So in a team battle, which is largely what Silmarillion is geared towards, Nandangortha is a really, really valuable ally to have. But yeah, so that's going to do for the Dwarves of Mithrim Beast Hunters. I think that's most of their Orcish infantry. They do still have some Spider Riders as well. Now, there's some issues with the alphas here that we never managed to get resolved. This is a model that actually comes from Botet, and it is the Devourers or something like that. But the idea for the Devourers of Children, the name is a reference to a StarCraft unit, one of the original StarCraft units from the 1990s, which is a game I grew up playing. But I also got the idea from listening to a lot of like monster stories or like disappearance stories when I was out in the woods, as I said, which is just when I got the idea for this faction. So that's kind of where it comes from. There'd be a lot of... I live in Canada, there's a lot of like missing person cases out in the woods, so this is sort of the idea. That's sort of the idea behind the Devourers. They are effective against armor, despite their fearsome appearance. They do have a sense of self-preservation. They will run away, but they are very quick, and they have a ton of HP to sort of compensate for their very low armor values. They've also got some pretty decent numbers to boot. They're not super expensive, coming in at about 1,000. They get bonuses in the woods, but they have... Oh yeah, they can cause fear to infantry, but they have some penalties against cavalry, so cavalry can run them down like dogs. So they're a little bit more of a specialized unit that's pretty good at supporting pushes. Because they have a decent amount of damage and good charge bonuses, they can do alright against cavalry, but if melee cavalry manage to get a hold of them, say out in the middle of nowhere, the melee cavalry will pull them down pretty quickly. Especially units from like Valinor, for example, who have harassment jav cavalry. They can soften them up before they get in there, and then the Devourers can be in for a little bit of a... They can be in for a little bit of a shock. They also are not able to hide due to their monstrous frame, so it's not something that's going to be thrown at you out of nowhere. Next up, we have the Karangwi Broodmothers. They're going to be ridden by a clutch of the Dwarves of Mithrim Predators. And this is one of the 2 big spider units that Nandangortha have available. In total, I think they have 5. One of them is only available in campaign, and we'll talk about that unit a little bit later on. But the Karangwi Broodmother here has bonuses versus cavalry. It's got great bonuses in woods. It's got bonuses in deserts as well, sort of representing the desolation, but also the still forested nature. It is still in the north of Doriath, which is a forested Sindarin kingdom. They've got obviously very high armor, as you'd expect from elephant units. They've got a ton of HP, but they can be brought down very quickly with polearms or axemen. Especially two-handed axemen can do very, very nicely against them. One of the big differences between them and one of the other units that we're going to see is that they aren't as formidable in melee, and they don't have quite as much of a large attack radius, and their missile is obviously very different. But we'll talk a little bit about that other unit. But they're a little bit less suited to kind of scrapping it out with infantry, but they can do pretty well in that sort of situation. I also think that their bite isn't armor piercing, and yes, I get it, big spider jaws, it would probably be armor piercing, but that's just one of the things that's going to differentiate them a little bit more from the unit we're going to go and take a look at, and that is the Hungering Maw. Now, a little bit of custom lore on this particular creature. It is a legendary company, for those of you unfamiliar with the way that Silmarillion works and some of the innovations that we've brought into the mod. We have taken regular versions of units that exist elsewhere in the roster and re-specialized them and given them to a faction in a very limited capacity. And in most cases, we try to use that as a way to tie the lore into the factions. So House Finarfin, for example, has the company of Prince Gwyndor. They have they're impetuous, so they'll charge without orders. They have a really high charge radius. So if those of you familiar with the Nir Nayeth know the ad and the opening stages of that battle, we'll get a lot out of it. For those of you that don't, it's just another cool unit that adds some extra functionality to these smaller, more specialized rosters that are present in Silmarillion factions. But yeah, Hungering Maw, let's talk a little bit about them. The idea I had for the Hungering Maw was a sort of lone predator who stalks the peaks of Nandangortha, occasionally coming down to feed in the valley, driven by the insatiable hunger of their progenitor, Ungoliant. Eventually, it's almost a cycle of destruction. Consider the Hungering Maw to be the season of winter in Nandangortha. The Hungering Maw will descend at fairly regular intervals and wreak all kinds of havoc until it is later driven away by the Dusamanuthan orcs back to the peaks from whence it came. What really distinguishes it from the Karangwi Broodmother is higher HP. It's got better melee stats, but it also has a really nasty armor-piercing and body-piercing missile, which is meant to be part of its sort of feeding habit. So it will vomit forth digestive juices onto units, which will basically melt them within their armor. So hence the armor piercing, and hence the body piercing nature of that projectile. Hungering Maw has some great utility. It's not a unit that you want to sort of let out of your sight for very long. I think it can also hide in the woods, but one of the big differences between this and the other unit is that this one can run amok. So if you deal enough damage to the Hungering Maw, you don't necessarily have to kill them all off the way you would with the Karangwi Broodmother. You can deal just enough damage to the Maw to make it kind of go crazy, and then it's out of the battle, and that's pretty well it. I believe it also has a higher radius for its tusk attacks, so it will do more damage in melee, and that's to sort of compensate for the lack of numbers. So obviously it's this sort of lone hunter. Next, we'll move on to the Karangwi Goreswarm. This is another model that hails from Botet. I believe it's their Scarab unit. And yeah, it's some real heavy metal naming here. I kind of went a little bit wild with it, but I don't mind. So the idea behind the Goreswarm is that they are just the sort of refuse and progeny that sort of lives in the cave systems or in the forested floors of the areas of Nandangortha, consuming whatever they can get their hands on. They're obviously individually very weak, but there are many of them in a unit, and they're extremely cheap. Completely pathetic in melee. They do have a pretty decent attack, and this is another anti-cavalry tool as well. So you can see there that they can hide anywhere, and they also have a bonus fighting cavalry. Very sizable bonuses as well. Now, this is not a unit that is going to like slaughter, say, heavily armored knights, for example, but most of the cavalry in the game, if you get them stuck on the Goreswarm will drag them down and trade extremely efficiently. So it's just another sort of tool in the utility kit of Nandangortha. Let's move on now to their last few units here. And then we'll talk about the sort of hidden unit that you're not seeing at the moment. So next we have the Dwarven Hunting Pack, which is another thing drawn from Bowtet. We obviously owe them a huge, huge debt. And if you guys haven't played the beginning of the End Times mod, you're missing out, man. Go and check it out for sure. In any case, Dwarven Hunting Pack. They obviously have a lot of HP there. They're reasonably expensive, sort of like mid-tier expensive, coming in at about 700 gold. They have area attacks because they are elephants, so they come with all of the sort of bonuses and defects that being an elephant unit entails. Not great armor, not great defense, enough armor to be sort of... They have like a scaly hide, basically, that will protect them from incoming non-armor piercing damage fairly well. They're very quick, excellent flankers, and with that area of attack, they can be used to support a push from the Dwarven orcs. Or whatever it is that you need help with. This is another unit that is very weak to cavalry as well. Now they have decent enough damage and charge, so off the charge they can do pretty well. But cavalry will run them down like dogs, and siege weapons especially. So there's a unit in the dwarves that we're going to check out, and siege weapons on that dwarven unit will absolutely destroy that unit. So that's something to bear in mind. But they're an excellent supporting unit. They can hide in long grass, like sort of what you're seeing here. And yeah, that's the Dwarven Hunting Pack. So let's move on now to the Karangwi Hunters. Karangwi, I think, means bloody maw, or something like that, in Sindarin. And this is their spider riding unit. It does exactly what it says on the tin. They've got poison arrows, because of course they do. They are armed with spears in melee, so much like the Beast Hunters, this is one of your anti-cavalry deterrents. It's a very versatile unit. They're a little bit slow, however, but you do have some fast-moving units that you can potentially use to support them, or to, at the very least, body block for them. So yeah, Karangwi Hunters, they've got really good melee attack. They've got exceptionally large range for units of their type. I think they clock in about 180 range. Maybe a little bit under that, maybe it's like 170, but that is really good range for a horse archer unit, like very exceptional. They've got pretty good defense in melee, they've got multiple HP coming in at 3, and they've got 5 armor as well. And then we move on to the sort of cream of the crop here of the Spider Riders, and those are of course the Karangwi Bloodgorgers. They are ridden by the Dwarven Flesh Feasters, and they're pretty beefy. They require some support for sure, as they are definitely one of the slower units in the game. But they've got great armor coming in at 11. They've got pretty good defense skill. They've got bonuses, I think, to the tune of like +4, +5 against every mount type that there is. And they've got 5 hit points. It's nasty. Really, really nasty. But yeah, that is something to bear in mind. So they are quite slow. They can be kited. So you maybe want to put your general into a unit of, say, the Flesh Feasters. I believe that's who they are. And use these as kind of the spear tip on your assaults. Use them recklessly. They're not super expensive. 1200 is actually not a lot to pay for 5 HP cavalry. In fact, I think it's the only 5 HP cav unit in the game. So that does it for most of the Nandangortha roster. One of the units that maybe I'll show you a little bit later is the Karangwi Baneling, which, if the Devourers of Children reference didn't tip you off, I am a fan of StarCraft. So the Baneling is, well, it's a spider, and it works like a StarCraft Baneling. You can throw it at things, it will explode and kill a whole bunch of things in the area. It's a fun little innovation that really comes down to some unique projectile types, but it's pretty damn cool. And it also comes with fixed animations for spiders, which is potentially a topic of conversation, because currently the Karangwi Hunters and the Bloodgorgers are using a cavalry animation, but it is possible to sort of change it up a little bit and turn them into elephants. That's something that you guys can definitely give us feedback on. Now that the new patch is out, you can take a look at these units and decide if you want them to have like area of effect attacks and things like that, but also coming with a lot more hard and soft counters. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look in the chat here. Oh wow, there's quite a lot. If I were to place Angband in campaign, since it's an evil faction, will there be a special script when Angband gets all 3 Silmarils? Angband is probably going to start with all 3 Silmarils, from what I have discussed with most of the people there. And the Silmarils will have some pretty sizable campaign bonuses. We haven't determined exactly what those are. It's still a little bit early for that. Yeah, but Angband will most likely start with all 3 Silmarils, which of course is going to earn you the ire of the Sons of Feanor and their allies. And that'll be sort of a driving force behind the conflict in the campaign as Angband. But Angband will also have some twists and turns as well. It's worth noting that there will be, in addition to there being a full-on self-contained War of Wrath campaign, there will be a War of Wrath event in the Angband campaign, and for Nandangortha as well, that brings Valinor and their invasion fleet to the shores of the hinterlands. So that is something that you will have to deal with as Angband as well, not to mention being essentially hated by most of the factions out there. That being said, you will have allies interspersed throughout the map. Nandangortha, the faction we just looked at, is one of those potentials. We have another faction coming up that will be the Brood of Glaurung that will add some more monsters, and yes, I finally caved on this. Even a flying unit will be present in the Brood of Glaurung, as well as the big man himself, which is something that I'm going to be making as a project for school. And then, of course, you've got Nandangortha and the Ulfang Easterlings and other things like that. Let's move on here. We have John Bob. While on the topic of this faction, could you talk a little bit about the infamous self-exploding spider, its planned use and effectiveness? At the moment, I think I've got a pretty good implementation for it. The only reason that it's not being included in the sort of base release, something that you can use in multiplayer, you can use it. You can use it in scenarios. It's present in the faction. It works. It won't cause crashes. It's missing a unit card, but that's basically it. So it does work. The only issue is that it requires a lot of explanation on how to make it work. So you can explode this thing literally at any time, and there's a lot of potential for trolling. And that's because of the way that the projectile works. The projectile has extreme range, so you need to turn off your fire at will. Otherwise, your baneling will detonate immediately. You also need to get within a certain distance, which takes a little bit of feeling out. And I think Waffles said it best in the Discord, is that units shouldn't have to come with I think it was like an instruction manual or something like that. So it works. It's working more or less the way I want it to, but because it requires a lot of like finessing, I didn't think the unit would be particularly popular. So barring some new innovations, it may be added later, and I may just, provide an instruction manual, but it's not a unit that is user friendly basically at the end of the day, and that's why it's not available in the regular roster. Let's see what else we got here. How would you deal with the dwarves as Nandangortha? Well, one of the bigger innovations. I guess that's just a new thing. I mean, it's not exactly innovative, adding bonuses to things. But all of the one-handed and two-handed axe units have gotten additional bonuses against elephants. The dwarves also have a lot of polearm units, which are obviously a very big danger to anything that is a mount. So elephants are considered to be a species of mount, obviously. They've also got pikemen. They've got the beast slayers, which is a unit that we're going to talk a little bit about as well. They've got crossbows, and they've also got a ballista chariot, a mobile piece of artillery. And that's something that generally in Silmarillion we're kind of moving towards, is like mobility. Trying to make games more mobile, less static. It's not perfect with the dwarves. They're still a little bit static, but they are also missing certain units. So yeah. Anyway, let's move on now. Sculpt splitters and hunting pack. That's just chatta. Crossbows don't have much range or ammo. Nan has more AP ammo, and the huge monsters get countered hard by all polearms. Yeah, that's a good point. And the Dragon Slayer units are also really good at it as well. There's some two-handed units with two-handed axes that are cheap and small, and you can kind of just throw them at the monsters and not really have to worry too much about it. I think that's all, so let's go ahead and take a look at the Mithrim faction. Assuming that they are all out in the... Oh, sorry, this isn't Mithrim, it's the Avari. And I believe that they are all here and good to go. Let me just restart this just because I can't show you the stats on them. I'll pick another one of our new maps here, since we have just so many of them. So many. And we're going to play as the Avari, and Gondolin will be our opponent. There you go. Some of the unique looking Gondolin units. Why not? Why not? Right, so most of the Avari faction is going to be composed of light infantry. Even their high tiers are quite light, and that's something that's fairly new because we just don't have a ton of light high tier units. For good reason. Obviously high tiers are smaller, they're more expensive, so it can be asking a lot to get people to commit resources to them when they can simply die off to missiles. Pop these guys out here. Tree units can go over here, and put the high tier units over here together, and then these guys. That's a good way of sort of breaking it up here. So let's go ahead and start with our first unit. So we're gonna go through some of the Avarin mid-tier light infantry. Obviously we still have to switch out some of these things here, but that's something that's gonna come in time. The important thing to note about the Mosstalkers of the Darkling Woods, I know that's quite a mouthful, isn't it, is that they are poison arrows. It's actually the only dedicated archer unit that the Avari have, strangely enough. They do focus a little bit more on mid-range and close-range savagery, although they do have some pretty interesting longer-range options. So the archers here are shielded. They will get a small shield bonus from the front. They also have clubs in melee, so they can club you to death with armor piercing. They've got a decent enough defense skill and predictably very low armor. Most of the Avari units do have low armor. You can bring a decent amount of them. You can bring about 3 or so. Not going to win you any skirmish competitions against factions like the Falas or, heaven forbid, Assyrian, but it is enough to put a little bit of pressure and make you not completely helpless. All in all, a pretty solid unit. One of the big things to note about most of the Avari is that they're not industrialized. They're not particularly battle tested. So while they have very high base morale, they don't have the same disciplined morale shock traits that a lot of other factions will have. So shocks can be quite effective on them. So if you can kill off, half the unit really quickly, you might be able to make them run away. But they will, because of the high morale, eventually reform and come back at you. Next we have the Stone Hewers of the Darkling Woods. We tried to go for that sort of primal look with them. I think this was spearheaded by Argus and Steward of Dale. And I'm pretty sure that there's some other things added in there. I think there's some Elder Scrolls textures that get used here. But each one of these units has an overall theme. So obviously the Mosstalkers are like covered in that sort of green haze, and they're wearing wood and fur, and they just look at home in like a moss-covered pit in the middle of the woods. Whereas the Stone Hewers seem more like cave dwellers. Obviously, they have that very pallid, an almost corpse-like pallor to their skin. They're all wearing stones for armor and things like that, and their axes are probably also made out of stone. Thing to note about the Stone Hewers is that they actually have really, really good damage, and you can upgrade that even further to 13 with armor upgrades. They've got great charge bonuses in terms of grinding up chaff or going even toe-to-toe with other possibly even high-tier units. They can do quite well for themselves. They're a decent enough cavalry deterrent with that almost 20 charge, but they don't have great defensive skill. Their shields are quite small, and like most of the Avarin units, they have low armor, although theirs is a little bit higher than some of the other units, like the Mosstalkers. Next here we come to the Bow Wards, and obviously they're using a lot of tree bark, wooden masks, and their color palette reflects that. It's actually a really tightly visually designed faction overall. Got to give it to Steward of Dale and Argus. They have fabulous melee defense, as our spirit units do. Very little armor, but their shield value is actually a little bit higher as well. So that's something to note, is that most of the Avari units don't have great shields. In fact, I think Yeah, the only thing that even comes close to it is one of their bodyguard tier units. So, light Avari infantry, they're actually very quick as well. One of the things that the Avari don't have is cavalry. So to compensate for that somewhat, without eliminating the weakness entirely, the Bow Wards have extra bonuses against cavalry, and they're also a little bit faster. And you can bring, I think, 6 of them in total. So you can sort of flood the field with these units and use them in tandem with other units to try and zone out cavalry while you win critical engagements elsewhere, such as the infantry fight, which is where the Avari can do very well. We'll come to them in a second. Next we have the Legendary Company. This is one of the, I think the only Legendary Company currently that you can bring 2 of, and that is the Host of the Withered Ash. Now a little bit of lore behind these guys is that the Withered Ash is sort of a place within the forest of Taurim Dwinath, where many of the Avari would often gather for festivals, things like that. This is before the ash itself was withered. Eventually, they were driven out of there by incursions of orcs and other less than savory creatures, such as spiders from Nandangortha, just monsters of Morgoth that sort of marauded throughout Baleria and throughout Morgoth's dominion of the place, and destroyed the ash, and so it was burnt up there. And now the host of the withered ash, they fight in total silence. They are locked morale, and they are some of the guardians of this former place of worship, sort of clinging to their traditions of the past and hoping that maybe some elves eventually one day will return and things can get back to normal. They're very, very scary in close quarters. They've got good damage, especially for being a spear unit. A decent enough charge. They have a minor shield value. That's something that we added in the new patch to all pole arm units, with the exception, I think, of halberds. So I think it's mostly spears, and I think it's actually just pikes. These guys might have it for a different reason, but they do have a minor vestigial shield value there. Doesn't do a lot, but it does something. They've got a very high defense skill of 13, so trying to break them down from the front is not easy. And they've got that armor value of 6, which is one of the higher values in the mod. But of course, they're a little bit smaller than most of the other Avari units, and they're quite expensive as well. And the Avari have a decent amount of expensive units, so it is something that you have to sort of balance. They're not an auto-include by any means. Moving on now to the tree units. So the Avari do fight side by side with a lot of horns. Not Ents, mind you, just angry trees with angry hearts that rise up out of the ground and tear people to shreds. We actually used a lot of Botet stuff for this as well. I think all of their tree units come from Botet in one way or another, so big thank you to their team. The Thorncasters of Taurin Dwinath are a species of harassment javelins. Good thing we talked about that already. They've got a little bit extra range, I believe, and a little bit extra ammunition. Other things to note is that they are heavy. So many of the tree units sort of follows a similar philosophy to, say, the Wood Elves from Warhammer, in that a lot of the Elven units are much more fragile, whereas the tree units are far more durable, but also don't really have a ton of damage. So melee attack of 8, obviously not amazing. You can upgrade it with an attack upgrade to, I think, about 11, or 12, depending on who it is that you're asking. But overall, their stats are much more defensive in nature. So they've got 9 armor, which is amazing. They've got 2 shield, and that's one of the things that all of the woodland units are going to share together, is that they get this like bark skin, basically, that will give them bonuses against missiles, at least from the front. High defense skill. It makes them, all these things together combined to make them probably the best harassment javelin unit in the game. They've got good numbers, they've got a lot of ammunition, they've got great range, and they have fabulous defensive stats. So they can go toe-to-toe with other harassment javelins and wipe them out, and still be relatively strong by the end of it. So that's an important thing for the Avari. So they're outgunned at long range, but when it comes to the mid-range, they do have a lot of staying power, and the Thorncasters are a big part of that. So we're going to move on now to the grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth. I was playing a lot of FromSoft games when I came up with some of the names, so I feel that that's probably obvious to anybody out there who plays Dark Souls or Elden Ring. In any case, the grandfather of the Deepwood Hearth is a mobile artillery unit. It's probably sensing a theme here. Actually, that comes to mind that I missed the Urush Abomination, who works very similarly to this to the Grandfather Deepwood Hearth. They are both long-range artillery units. They're also elephants. They're decent enough in close quarters, but their ammunition is not armor-piercing, and it is not by any means unlimited. So they've got good range, but you do have to pay attention to your targets, and there are also some interesting little quirks with the Grandfather, such as if you issue attack commands, one after the other. So a rock flies out of the Grandfather, you issue another attack command. You can basically, unless you have to turn around or like significantly change your angle of fire, you can basically turn it into a semi-automatic death machine. It's really cool and something that I came across in testing and I had no idea about. So a little bit of advanced knowledge there for other players. Testers will use that against you. So if you see this, shooting bam, 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 that's why. You can do it right back to them. Over here, we have the Thorned Ancients of Taur im Duinath. Basically, their job is to get in the way, to be a pain in the ass. They can run away. They are not, suicidal. They do have a sense of self-preservation. But they have great armor. 12 armor is nothing to sneeze at. They've got decent defense skill. They've got an especially powerful bark skin bonus, and they've got 8 hit points, and there's 20 of them. So it's a huge roadblock if you're trying to carve through the Avaran army. They're mobile as well, so they can just be a big pain in the ass. They are technically infantry, so cavalry will do very well against them. They can actually kill them instantly, because that's what cavalry does to infantry. But other than that, there are not too many things that will be able to chop their way clear of the Thorned Ancients in a hurry. Next we have one of the bodyguard units. These are going to be the Shades of the Guarded Path. So each one of these units is going to have some sort of unique backstory to them. So the Shades of the Guarded Path. I thought this was a particularly interesting take, as they are guardians of the chieftain. The elves are of course immortal, and the Shades of the Guarded Path, they're sort of shade. For those of you for whom English isn't your first language, shade is basically not just what comes off a tree; it's a ghost. So they consider themselves to be ghosts. Their time is limited. The Avari are very warlike. Their homeland is very dangerous. And when their chieftain dies, they die with him. After, of course, avenging his death. So you can sort of think of them as like samurai ronin. But that is quite the sacrifice for the Eldar. For us, we're only around for, 80 years or 60, depending on where you live. But for the elves, they live forever. So that's a big commitment to their lord. And naturally, they will defend him with everything that they have. They have brutal damage, a huge charge value. They've got 6 armor, so not amazing. Again, very lightly armored. Pretty decent defense skill, an okay shield, and this is one of the single HP bodyguards. You can actually bring 2 of them, but they're expensive. That being said, if you get them in the right engagements, these guys are absolute monsters. They will chew through chaff like butter. Very elite units and multiple HP elite units, especially ones tuned toward fighting infantry, will wipe them out. But most things, cavalry will do really well against them as well. But many of the units in the game will get themselves bisected by these ferocious warriors, so something to bear in mind. Next, we come in to the high tier units. So first, we have the branch stalkers of the Green Sea. The Green Sea is sort of an area of the forest of Taur im Duinath. It's sort of like a borderlands area. It's very vast and very green, as you might imagine. So it's sort of figurative language there. The branch stalkers are therefore quite good at grinding up chaff. Really good at fighting infantry. They've got a pretty decent little missile there. They have like throwing daggers essentially, which they will launch before they get into combat. They've only got about 2 of them, so they'll throw them quite quickly. Their charge bonus is brutal. They've got really good defense skill, even above that of the general that we just saw. But they are quite fragile, so missiles will tear them to bits, but luckily they can hide anywhere. And they also frighten enemy infantry, so that's something to bear in mind. Over here, we have the Gloom Hunters. Gloom Hunters of the Trackless Dark, which is one of the more dangerous areas inhabited by the spawn of Ungoliant and the beasts of Morgoth, deep within the woods of Taur im Duinath, that the Avari, and in particular the Gloom Hunters, keep from infecting the rest of the woods. Gloom Hunters have these large 2-handed glaives here. They've got really good defense. I think they may also be relentless, which helps them from getting knocked over or staggered as easily when fighting monsters. But they don't have a ton of damage. That being said, that's not a ton of damage against infantry. They have a crap ton of damage against mounts and in particular elephants. So they are very, very nasty when used in their role. But they can also be a nice little armor-piercing option in the event that, say, you're fighting the dwarves, who have quite low melee defense. So that 11 damage with an attack of a grade becomes about 14, and then you can overwhelm the armor values that factions like the dwarves will rely on. Or heavy infantry in general tends to have quite low or much lower melee defense than the light and medium infantry counterparts. So the Gloom Hunters of the Trackless Dark can find a niche outside of hunting monsters, but they are quite good at it, and they can hide anywhere. And then we come to these beauties right here. Let's see if we can get a real good look at them. They have some ferocious looking, almost Wendigo masks. These are the Rangers of the Hidden Path. I can't remember off the top of my head the lore we came up for what the Hidden Path was, but I think it's something that you dedicate yourself to. Sort of similar to Eldar, like Craft World Eldar dedicating themselves to a shrine, say, to like the Phoenix Lord or Azurian or whatever, whoever the Dire Avenger one is. Anyway, they have extremely high defense skill. They wield daggers in close combat, so they have very low damage, but they also have more armor piercing. Again, you're kind of seeing a theme here. The Avari have a lot of damage, but they're also very glass cannony. The defense skill can be bypassed entirely by missiles, which can make them just get absolutely destroyed. They use poisoned hunter javelins. This is an opportunity to talk a little bit about the other type of javelin that isn't harassment. And that is going to be the hunter javelins. They are slower in flight than harassment javelins. They have less range and less ammunition, but they hit like absolute trains. So they got 10 missile attack. It's armor piercing. It will absolutely devastate small entity units. So, pardon me, bodyguards, elephants, things like that. The Rangers of the Hidden Path can be extremely useful, or for just chewing out heavy infantry. That's kind of their niche. And then afterwards, they make an okay melee unit. You can upgrade their melee attack to like 11 or so with an attack upgrade, but it's not huge. Melee defense is quite high in our mod, so it's not necessarily going to do particularly well against units with very high melee defense or very high shield values. That being said, they fill their niche, they fill it well, and this is probably one of the units that is absolutely a must-have in a lot of Avari picks. Not in all of them, but in a lot of team games and stuff like that, you're going to see Rangers of the Hidden Path. So if you're fighting the Avari, it's a good bet to bring something that can counter them. They can be countered pretty handily by missiles. Yeah, I think that's going to do for the Avari so far. Let's go ahead and take a look at chat here and see if I've missed anything else. Let's see. All the Avari units look amazing. You guys did an amazing job. Well, thank you so much. I will pass that on to Argus and Stewart. I think Stewart might even be in the chat there. Does the Urush Abomination have a similar machine gun death feature like the Grandfather? Yes, absolutely. This applies not to specific units, but to basically any elephant cannon unit. So if it's elephant artillery, you could do this. So the Uruloki, you could also do it with them. I had no idea going into this. I spent a lot of time trying to get the Urush Abomination projectile to be where I needed it. You know, not too powerful, but also not too pathetic. And that's one of the things that I noticed is, yeah, you can turn it into a semi-automatic death machine. It's really cool. That's one of those, I guess, sort of skill ceiling things that you're only going to see from, like, players who know about it. So now you're a part of that exclusive club. Use it on people. It will be funny. Let's see. Do the higher tier Dwarven units, will they be able to inspire fear in their opponents? Yes. So one of the features of the Dwarves is that anything using a mask, those Dwarven war masks, will cause fear. I decided to integrate that into game mechanics because of the books. Basically, it says that the dwarves would use these masks in war, and it would be frightening for their opponents. So I decided to, just throw that in there with the fear, or as fear. Doing it with Uruloki seems a bit wild. It can be. There are some limitations to the way that missiles target things. So one of the things to note is that any unit that's being shot at, the unit shooting at it will try and aim for the middle of the unit. So you can spread out, or you can just sort of tank it or whatever, but or try to like just thin out your lines so that when it hits the middle, it's going to be hitting the least amount of things. That's one of the observations that I took away from testing. So that's one of the ways to mitigate that. So there is some counterplay. It's not just like, press button, receive death and victory, but it is also useful. And there are times when you don't have that option. So it's kind of cool. Anyway, so we're going to move on to the next faction here. The next one we're going to take a look at is the Sindar of Mithrim, which is one of our other new factions. We're getting through it. It's been a long stream so far, but we are getting through it. After the Elves of Mithrim, I'm going to have 2 more factions to show you, and then we can talk a little bit about campaign, and then we can hopefully play at least one game. And then we'll take all the unique units again. Maybe I'll remember to look at them this time. Uh-oh. Chose the wrong one here. That's fine. We're just going to go through them unit to unit before they get all dirty from the desert area. So, the Elves of Mithrim. What are the... And I may be misremembering this, and so Seward can correct me if I'm wrong, because he designed this faction. But one of the big things about the Elves of Mithrim is that they have some unique projectile units. So they have limited ammunition on a lot of their cooler projectiles and archers, but they do have some fairly unique roles to them, and they are predominantly a mid-tier faction. They don't actually have more than, I think, 1 high-tier infantry unit, and the other 2 are going to be specialist missile units who aren't particularly amazing in close combat. So they are going to rely really heavily on their mid-tier units. They're going to have a lot of spears, very high shield values as well, and they will also have some unique weapon types, such as the Matic, which is sort of a combination of an axe and a mace, and we'll talk a little bit about that once we get to the relevant units. But yeah, by and large, they're going to have pretty good ranged presence, not amazing, so they're not meant to be, the anti-Assyrian or just to sort of take over the range scene entirely, but they are, not bad at it. And they've also got a lot of really strong close combat options. They've got limited but useful cavalry, and a decent amount of AP as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So first we'll go through the mid-tier roster here. This is sort of your bread and butter sword unit. They've got a little bit better charge value than your average sword unit. They've got decent enough attack. You can boost that up to 10 with an attack upgrade. They've got 6 armor, 8 defense, and a massive shield value of 9, which is something that is usually only reserved for heavy infantry. There's not a ton of light or medium infantry in the game that have super high shield values, and Mithrim is one of those unique factions. They also get combat bonuses in the snow, and yeah, you can bring a lot of them. I think you can bring like 6 of them or something in total. Next we'll move on to the sentries. It's going to be these boys here with those particularly long spears, and it sort of does what you would expect from a mid-tier unit. Mid-tier spear unit. They're a nice anti-cavalry deterrent. They've got that massive shield value, pretty good defense skill as well, and they've also got an armor value of 6. So a lot of fairly simple stuff there. They will also counterattack when charged, as all of our spear and polearm units will do. Let's see here. Next we have the tunnel runners. They are a shock infantry unit. Now there's not a lot of shock infantry. In fact, I think this is the only quote-unquote shock infantry unit. It's really more of a dual-wield unit being used by the Elves of Mithrim. They don't have amazing armor by any means, and quite anomalously for much of the roster, they don't have any shield value either. But what they do have going for them is really high charge bonus. They've got a decent attack value of 12, which you can boost up to 15. They've got good numbers, 141 or 140. I think that's probably like the general in there. And they've got armor piercing as well, since they're using that Matic. They can also hide in the woods, and they get bonuses in the snow. So, sort of a fodder-ish unit, or at least the closest to it that you're ever going to see an Elven faction get to. But they're nasty, especially when they're supporting the rest of the Mithrim line. Like you send them in first, and then follow it up with some help. Then the Tunnel Runners of Mithrim can be really nice. And with that armor piercing and high charge bonus, in a pinch you could use them as an anti-cavalry deterrent. They will die in extremely large numbers, but it is a possibility. And that's a choice that you'll have to make throughout your games. Moving on now, we have the Lookouts of Mithrim. They're going to have a shield value, because of course they do. They're just shielded archers. They're mid-tier, pretty well do what you'd expect from any other elven mid-tier archer. They've got 5 missile attack, which is very typical. Not amazing melee stats. There is a lot of differentiation between infantry and skirmishers in the game in terms of traits, morale, and overall statistics. And this unit is no different in that regard. But they do have that shield, which is really nice. And it helps them just survive in a situation where you have to go kind of toe-to-toe with other archers. So Mithrim can be really, really useful, and this is a very potentially cost-effective unit that you can bring, I think, in numbers of up to 3 units in multiplayer. What else do we have here? Next we have the Outlaws of Mithrim. These are fugitives from the fall of Mithrim, presumably drawn from Dorloman. So these would be men of the House of Hador. Now, they are able to hide anywhere. They are obviously very light. They've got 2-handed spears on them, which is potentially destructive in tandem with the ability to hide anywhere. They've also got bonuses in the woods. They can hide in long grass. Maybe they just are able to hide in long grass, and perhaps it's not everywhere. I think they can hide everywhere. I'm like 90% sure that they can. In any case, if you can spring them as an ambush onto, say, light infantry, who they can cut apart quite nicely with their throwing axes, or once that's all and said is done with the skirmishing, they can be used as an anti-cavalry deterrent, something that frees up troops from your main line to do what they need to do, or you can use them in ambushes. I have at least one game, which I'm pretty sure I posted on my channel, where the Outlaws of Mithrim kind of caught a unit of my high-tier cavalry at unawares and inflicted some pretty heavy crippling losses on them. Other than that, it's more of a utility unit. There's not a ton of them, but they're not also very expensive. And with those throwing axes against the right targets and those 2-handed spears, they can punch well above their weight. Let's see here. I think that does it for most of the mid-tier roster. Nope, we have some Shore Riders of Mithrim here. Think of them as a medium cavalry variant of the Feanor mounted company. They do have some harassment javelins there, decent amount of damage on them. Good enough melee attack, which you can upgrade. They've got an okay charge bonus as well. Most melee cavalry don't have super nice charge bonuses, but the Shore Riders of Mithrim, in fact, do. And they've got some big bonuses against cavalry. So they're not going to win any contests for, I would say, best melee cavalry, but they are certainly extremely useful and very versatile. So they can wear a lot of hats, although they only choose to wear that beautiful feather thing that Stewart came up with for them. Okay defensive skill, but they carry over that massive shield value, so it's pretty hard to cut them down with arrows, at least from the front. What music is this? Oh, Jeff Van Dyck, you disappoint me. Yeah. So let's move on now to the high tiers, the Bodyguards and the Legendary Company. Oh, actually, you know what? I missed one. They have some Hunter Javelins here. These are the Hunters of Mithrim. 10 missile attack. They've also got really good damage for what they are, and pretty decent defensive skill. That being said, they don't have the massive shield values or the better armor of a lot of the other mainline units, and they lack the discipline trait, so they will rout off more easily, and their morale is overall lower. But other than that, it's a Hunter Javelin unit. It does what you would expect it to do, destroys monsters, bodyguards, and heavy infantry. Moving on now, we have the Eagle-Eyed of Androth. Now, the thing that sort of sets them apart from other high-tier archers is that they have less damage. You can see their missile attack there is only about 4, but they have extreme range, and their missiles are very, very quick. So they will reach their targets and be able to exploit lapses in, say, formation or angle or whatever very efficiently. And they're also really nice for dealing with certain factions like, say, Assyrian, for example. Because Assyrian units don't have a lot of armor anyway, so 4 missile attack is actually pretty nice against them. And can pose a pretty serious threat if brought in numbers. But of course, there's only 100 of them. They've got decent enough armor values of 7. They've got defensive skill there as well, and I believe they have a defensive skill of 12, and I believe they have swords in close combat. So not bad, expensive, but more of a niche unit in my eyes. Then we have the Bane of the Incomers. So they have some special bonuses against specifically Easterling cavalry types. So specifically Easterling mount types. They can hide anywhere, and their arrow is very much akin to a mangonel. So if you guys are familiar with how a mangonel works, you need to very accurately sight your distances. It's not like catapults where you can just sort of, click and forget, and the catapult will do the rest. A mangonel and this arrow, you need to get your spacing properly because it will split into smaller projectiles. So the Bane of the Incomers will use something I believe called crystal arrows that will split like a mangonel and shower an area with shards. And those shards can be extremely devastating. So they can do about 8 missile damage, which is, I think, one of the highest, if not the highest, bow damage in the game. Fabulous for shredding apart battle lines or blobs or groups of light and medium infantry if you can get around their shields. They also have a decent enough damage in close quarters. Obviously, they hit like trains off the charge. The catch, though, there's not many of them. They're very expensive. Not a lot of armor, not a lot of skill, so they will die off really quickly, and cavalry will utterly ruin them. That being said, they can hide anywhere, so you have the opportunity to pick your moment when you use the Bane of the Incomers. And then after that, all bets are off because archers will be gunning for you, cavalry will be gunning for you. It's not a unit that you can really afford to just kind of let sit and do its own thing. Next we move on to the Hewing Guildsmen of Androth, and they are using, I believe, some sort of crystalline armor or something that's fashioned from metals and gems that they'll mine within their home. And they also have Maddox as well. So let's take a look here. This is probably the heaviest unit that the Elves of Mithrim can muster. And they also have an armor upgrade, so you can take that 7 armor and bump it up to 9. Defensive skill isn't amazing, but their shield value is extreme. That is very, very high. And of course, their armor piercing in melee as well. So as a mainline unit, I think you can bring up to 3 of them. It's an expensive investment. You're paying almost 1,000 gold per unit. But I got distracted by a general speech in the background. But yeah, they're a fabulous addition to the main line, and taken in tandem with a lot of the sort of mid-tier meat that Mithrim can bring to bear, sword bearers, sentries, etc., tunnel runners. They're an excellent unit, and they definitely form the core of your infantry force when you decide to bring them. Next, they have a ballista, and that's going to be armed by spear units there. It's a ballista. It does ballista things, exactly what you would expect. Next, we have the catapult here, and that's actually crewed by Hewing Guildsmen of Androth. And one of the differences here between this and the Nir Nayarthar Noithiad patch is that we've actually labeled these things, so you know what you're getting when you're bringing it. So you're like, oh, a catapult, and then you get some crew that you didn't have advertised to you at the multiplayer sort of selection screen earlier. Now you know exactly what you're getting into, so if you're familiar with the units, then you'll be familiar with the crews as well. They're basically carbon copies of each other. Let's see, I guess now we get to move on to the Bodyguards, don't we? And then we'll take a look at the legendary company. So the first one we're going to look at is the Elders of the Twilight Hearth. It's a hybrid spear and archer unit. They've got a decent enough amount of armor, coming in at about 7. They've got really high defensive skill and a massive shield value. This is not a unit that you want to skirmish with. Their ammunition pools are mercifully quite low, but they are 1 HP. You can bring 2 of them for obviously a 2,700 or so price tag, but they do add a lot of utility and a lot of staying power to your army. So if you're feeling that you're going to be under heavy missile attack, then they might pair quite nicely with a more cost-effective unit such as the Lookouts of Mithrim, the medium bowmen we looked at earlier, who are all shielded. Next we have the Scions of Tuor. Now they have terrible armor. They have 1 armor. They're very expensive. They are 2 HP. They can inspire. They can also make a shield wall. They are effective against armor, and most importantly, they are relentless. So these units do not have blocking animation, so they will just come at you full throttle from start to finish. And with that damage value of a massive 29, obviously they can make good on those threats of annihilation. That being said, they are limited a little bit by their very low armor and their low model count, and obviously the price tag there. And you can only really bring one of them. So that's going to be the Mithrim faction. A nice little addition here. It's worth noting that factions like Mithrim or what's the other faction we looked at? We looked at Mithrim, we looked at the Avari, and we looked at Nandangortha beforehand. These are all going to be minor factions. In the current conception of Silmarillion's campaign, you will not be able to play them. Not, a Mithrim campaign, but you will be able to use their units most likely in one capacity or another. Mithrim, from some discussions that I've had with the development team so far, we are looking at making them a vassal state of Fingolfin. So what that looks like if they end up being an independent entity or just simply subsumed into the larger Noldor empire that is Fingolfin and Hithlum in the north remains to be seen, but you will have access to these units in single player. Don't worry about that. In any case, let's move on now to our next faction. That is going to be Valinor. But before I do that, I want to take a look at chat here and see if I've missed anything. It doesn't look like I've missed too much here. What's the range of the Eagle Eye? I believe it's either 200 or 210, so it's probably the highest, or a contender for the highest range of any bowman in the game currently. Let's see here. We'll go to the Woods of Nogrod next. Why not? We were going to take a look at Valinor. Valinor has a lot more units and a lot more additions here, and I actually really like Valinor. They've got some really, really cool looking models, so let's get into it here. I'll like pre-organize things here. So there's the Teleri, there's the Vanyar. Oh, no, hold on, we're missing a Teleri unit. There we go. There's the Teleri, there's the Vanyar, Noldor, Maiar, and War Noldor. Okay. I think that'll do. Suppose we should give them a unit. Boop. Well, let's go ahead and divide them up into their various cliques. Boop. Maiar, and then this. Now, please do note, there will be new additions to a lot of these factions, so the fact that we have one Maiar unit right here does not mean that you will not get more Maiar units in the future. There's at least one more planned for multiplayer, and then I think 6 more planned for campaign. There will be a crap ton of Maiar. You will have more Maiar than you know what to do with. You will have so many that you will curse the fool who added so many Maiar into the game because they overshadow everything else. Probably. Maybe. I hope not. Anyway, Teleri. So Valinor is a faction that I can talk a little bit more intimately about just because this is a faction that I happen to design from the ground up. They are broken down into the various tribes that inhabit the Blessed Realm. So you're going to have the Teleri, who are by and large less adept at warfare than the Noldor and the Vanyar, with the Noldor probably striking the greatest balance of damage and defense, and the Vanyar being a little bit more specialized towards anti-monster, but also anti-armor. Whereas the Teleri kind of fill in all of the roles in between, all of the auxiliary roles that you would expect, intelligent beings like the Valar to utilize the Teleri for, doing the things that they're best at, which isn't necessarily frontline combat. So the first unit we have here is Shoal Hunters. They are a slinger unit, but they are unique in that they have no armor piercing, as the other slinger units do, but they have a split shot. They've got, I think, a little bit extra missile attack. Yeah, so most slingers fall into about 1 damage. These guys will have an extra point of damage, so basically double damage. And they will split into 3 or 4 smaller slings. So, to put that into perspective, take the number of models in here and multiply that by 3. And that's the amount of pain and suffering that they can visit upon their enemies. It is a lot, especially for unshielded or lighter units. Shoal hunters can stop them in their tracks. Like, it's absolutely brutal. They're a little bit expensive, and they're one of the few armor piercing units that Valinor actually has outside of the Vanyar and some of the more specialized Maiar. So that's something to bear in mind. They've got those little maces there in melee, so they can actually be a good pick against certain factions like the Dwarves, sometimes Feanor, other factions. You'll figure it out as you go along. But yeah, so they're nice little skirmishers here. We've got some more skirmishers in the form of the Mariners of Alqualonde. Let's see here. So this is going to be one of the harassment javelin units. Now they've got more ammunition, better numbers, and a decent enough shield value, which kind of puts them in the second place spot, I would say, right beneath the Thorncasters of Taurin Duinath, for the best skirmish javelin unit in the game. They've got good range, 100 range. They've got, I think, 1 or 2 extra shots, maybe 1. But they can just put a huge amount of volume of fire down the field with those extra 20 models. And they're very cost effective as well, coming in at 575. They're not great in melee with only a damage of 6. They've got okay skill, but like many of the Tolaran units, they also don't have good discipline traits, so they can be put to flight quite easily. And I think they've got, at least compared to the rest of the roster, they've probably got really low morale. That most factions are not. Most of the other units are going to sneeze at. They're going to laugh at them because they're much more likely to run than any of the other units in the game. Anyway, moving on now. Swan Guard of Alqualonde. These guys have a discipline trait. That's largely because that departure from the philosophy is largely because of practicality. Throughout testing them, they ended up being too easy to run away, and they would isolate a lot of the other units. So for practical purposes, they are able to stand their ground a little bit better, which I think is fitting because they are not a skirmisher. They are an infantry unit. What they do is get in there and die. They've got amazing defense skill, great numbers. They're super cheap, and their morale is okay. They're not going to kill a lot of things, and they can't form shield wall because they're not well trained enough to do so. But they are pretty damn good at body blocking and allowing some of these smaller multiple HP Valinor units to kind of do their thing. And these guys can definitely hold the line for an extended period. Next we come to the Sentries of Alqualonde. They are very diverse, very colorful, and of course, very blue. They have really good range, exceptionally high ammunition, and okay-ish missile attack. The idea behind them was sort of the slender and light bowmen that would have been present at Alqualonde during the sack by Feanor's Noldor. This would sort of be the mainstay of a lot of that army. They've got terrible armor, not amazing defensive skill. They do have swords in close combat, so they can hold the line alright-ish with that 8 skill. But they are by no means something that you want to commit to the front lines. But when it comes to being bowmen, they're annoying. They're cheap, you can bring a lot of them, and they've got good range and ammo. So be afraid. Be very afraid. Mounted variant of them here is, of course, the Shoal Runners, mounted on unicorns. Big chunky unicorns, because it's Valinor. Why not? Right? They're a weird high fantasy faction. They need to have unicorns. It's the law. Basically the same stats as the unmounted version, except they have double the ammunition, so that's something to bear in mind. You can bring, I think, 2 of them at the moment, but their red price isn't so terrible that you can't, sacrifice a little bit of money and invest into a third if you feel that it will be useful. But that is going to round it off for most of the Teleri units, and now we can take a look at the legendary company here. Now this is going to be the Grieving Sons. I think this unit is going to be something that people really enjoy. So The legendary company for the House of Feanor are the Accursed of Alqualonde. The Grieving Sons, a little bit of custom lore here that we wrote, are survivors, the family of survivors of Alqualonde, who lost family, friends, loved ones, fathers, etc. to the Noldoran sack of the city. So they are a lighter, more melee defense heavy counterpart to the Accursed of Alqualonde. So I like to think that it's a big grudge match, and for those of you who are curious, the Grieving Sons, they do take that fight. They take that fight 9 times out of 10. They've got better numbers, they've got incredible melee defense, only 7 armor, and they do have a vestigial shield point just to sort of... When we do that, it's sort of a way of representing the fact that the Eldar are a cut above of human beings. So they can missiles, javelins, they can potentially bat them out of the air. That's the kind of idea there. It's a little bit of deflection. It's not so much that it's overpowering, but it does set them apart from the Edain just that much more. None of the Edain have the ability to do anything even close to that. In any case, Grieving Sons, we'll give you one last good look at them, because I think the model is super cool. And then we're going to move on to the super glowy Vanyar. Now, it's not going to be as glowy for you guys, because I actually have Reshade on, but yeah, it just looks damn cool. Next, we move into the Plaza Guardians. The idea here, so you can see the little wings and stuff that they have on their back. Many of them will have 2 sets of wings on their back, and they'll have another 2 on their spear. The idea here being, of course, Seraphim, Avenging Angels. These are golden units armed to the teeth. They've got some really cool looking spears and things like that there. The Vanyar units are by and large medium infantry. They will all use spears. One of the few things that we actually know about the Vanyar and the way that they would wage war is that they were sometimes unofficially known as the Spear Elves. So that was their main weapon of choice. And they are damn good at using it. Armor piercing is one of the things that distinguishes the Vanyar from other spearmen. And the Plaza Guardians of Valmar, of course, have very, very good skill, multiple HP, but they do pay for that with an exceptionally large price tag and small units. So these are units that need to be supported. So there's a symbiotic relationship, I think, that should be taking place in your mind here between all of the various parts of the Valinor army. So the Teleri are there to support the Vanyar and keep them alive and just let them wreak utter havoc. And believe me, the Plaza Guardians are more than capable of that. Probably one of the more devastating units that you can bring. You can bring up to 3 of them, although it will cost you a suitable amount of money. But 3 of them going toe-to-toe against a lot of battle lines in the game, the Plaza Guardians are going to end that fight either in victory or they're going to get several hundred kills apiece. Potentially a very, very powerful unit. Obviously, there are some weaknesses to missiles, especially Hunter Javelins can destroy these units or at least shave off their extra HP very quickly and efficiently. Yeah, something you want to watch out for. Over here we have a more defensive variant, these being the Peacekeepers of Valimar. They have, obviously, the 7 armor, that's standard. They can actually upgrade their armor, though, and get 9 armor, making them a little bit more defensive. They've also got some extra defense points from their shield, making them much less vulnerable than the Plaza Guardians, but of course they do less damage, and they don't have shield wall, so they're going to do far, far less damage than their 200 counterparts. But when it comes to holding the line, these units are amazing. One other thing to note about the Vanyar is that they actually inspire units nearby. So a big block of Vanyar fighting together with other units is exceptionally hard to get rid of unless everything is going wrong for Valinor all at the same time. So something to bear in mind. And of course they have that 2 HP, and that's one of the big things about Valinor is that we found a way to have a lot of 2 HP, multiple HP units in the faction and still keep them reasonable and beatable. And that is especially, that is an accomplishment that I'm especially proud of, because a lot of these are mainline units. You're going to be using a lot of them all together. But we've managed to find a good implementation for it. So I'm proud of the team and I'm proud of the testers. Next here, you guys may have noticed I'm also a fan of Warhammer, and a lot of my passions make their way into the mod in some way or another. We have the Wild Riders of Orome, and They are specialized, as you would expect, being a spear unit, against fighting monsters. They have an armor-piercing charge, which can be absolutely devastating, even against infantry. Obviously, their damage is a little bit lower, as many of the spear units tend to be. But yeah, you definitely want to be afraid of a unit like this. They can hide in the woods. Actually, I think that they can hide anywhere, in fact. They have huge bonuses against elephant-type units, as you would expect that they would do. Orome being the Valar, who is most, I guess, closely associated with the hunt. He's almost like an Orion-esque figure in Warhammer, or I can't remember what the deer-headed Celtic god is called, but in any case, he is associated with fighting the monsters of Morgoth specifically, and they fear his horn, the Valaroma. So these are Vanyar, being elves particularly close to the gods, who are dedicated to him. Orome will get his own bodyguard elsewhere, but yeah, this is the unit that is currently present in the Valinor faction. It's sort of a mainline unit, not necessarily a bodyguard. Speaking of bodyguards, though, we're going to come on to the Kinsmen of Ingwe. This is some of the fine work of White in the Dark Cloud, one of our developers. He did an amazing job on this unit. I'll try and get it a little bit closer so you can see some of the details there. And they are the Kinsmen of Ingwe. This is the royal retinue of the High King himself. They've got great armor. You can upgrade that to 12. They've got incredible defense skill. They inspire nearby units. They have really good shield values. They're just sort of a middle-of-the-road option, just your standard bodyguard unit, whereas the Vanyar bodyguards are going to be a little bit more specialized, a little bit more flavorful. But this is that sort of middle-of-the-road pick when you kind of don't know what you want to eat that day. You just, you have a sandwich. That's what they are. They're a sandwich. They're great at what they do, but they're not particularly specialized in any one field. Let's see here. Oh yeah, one other thing I want to sort of draw your attention to, since we are talking about the Maiar, is that the general unit here, and this is going to be true for many of the other Maiar as well. That's actually Eonwe right there, the Herald of the Valar, and a lot of your Maiar units are going to have those golden eyes that he has there. It's a little detail. Most people, I expect, are going to miss it, and many more won't care. But for those of you out there who are interested in the ways that we're sort of trying to bring the First Age to life and add in all of the detail that only passionate fans are going to really care to do, that's one of the little ways that we do it. Moving on now, we can take a look at some of the Noldor. This is some of the fabulous work of Castellan. I think I reskinned them. But they're going to be the Noldor of House Finarfin. And that makes them very, very small. Obviously, they're smaller than the Vanyar units because they are simply a remnant of the once great people who decided to turn back after the sack of Alqualande, racked with guilt by the actions of their people, and they turned back. And Finarfin, who led them there, who's one of the remaining sons of the then deceased King Finwë, he became the de facto king of the people, and this is him sort of leading them back to war to rescue his kin in the hinterlands across the sea. In any case, Hearthguard of Tirion, defensive variant of the Noldor. You can actually upgrade their armor twice, so you can get them to 14 armor. They've got a huge shield value of 9. They've got massive melee defense there, and they actually occupy the catapult crews of the catapult, trebuchet, and ballista crews. So you can potentially make some pretty interesting loadouts, especially in sieges, where you're commanding, 4, 5, 6 units of Hearthguard, and that's a lot of defense and HP to try and chew through. But that being said, they are more defensively oriented, good at grinding things out, but they're not necessarily going to carry the day on their own. Sentinels, however, much more suited to field battles. They can absolutely destroy things, especially when you get them in amongst, say, the lower tier Tolarian units, and they're sort of body blocking and supporting one another. The Sentinels of Tirion are absolutely destructive. They have a huge amount of damage. You can see there, 19, charge value of 27. You can only upgrade their armor once, and it costs more to do so than it would with the Hearthguard, who are obviously more defensively specialized. Defense skill of 17, they're also relentless. They will destroy things. It's destructive. It's wonderful to see them do their thing, but they are expensive, and as many of the Noldor units, as holds true for many of the Noldor units, it's not cheap to bring them either. Next up, we have the Knights of Tirion, sort of a mounted variant of the Hearthguard. They're melee cavalry. These are the cavalry that are best specialized at fighting elephants, unlike other melee cavalry, or rather horses, sorry. Unlike other melee cavalry, they don't have particularly good bonuses against the elephants. That's a niche better filled by the Vanyar Wild Riders. But the Hearthguard are amazing at slogging it out with other cavalry, establishing some sort of command or potentially even cavalry superiority if well supported by allies and such on the field that keeps your flank secure. Rear charges with them with that massive base damage value of 12 plus an extra 4. They can be very, very versatile. That being said, be careful with them around elephant units. Elephants can do pretty well against them, especially because they're not many. Javelins and other harassment tactics are quite useful at bringing down the Knights of Tirion and reducing their combat effectiveness. Yeah, couple of fun little tips there for them. I think that's pretty well it. So we're gonna move on now. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't let you not see the Adepts of Toolcost. This is some of the work of Castellan, who just does an amazing job every single time. The Adepts of Toolcost are relentless. All Maiar units are 3 HP, so that's something to be aware of. They will also all be relentless as well. They have decent defense. They've got a good shield, but not a ton of armor. They're technically medium infantry, so there is sort of a chink in the proverbial armor in the sense that it doesn't exist. That being said, they are absolutely beastly in melee. When we were testing them, when they were still overpowered, I managed to beat the dwarves basically off the backs of them and the sentinels over here. They're an absolute powerhouse, but they are not so overwhelming due to the price tag and their low numbers and the lower armor that they can't be defeated. Even in the late game when you only sort of have the limping remnants of your once proud army. All that being said, we have a ballista, does what ballistas do. Same with the catapults, same with the trebuchet. They will probably be getting some new projectiles. The only issue is that when my house was destroyed by a flood, I kind of lost my phone, and I had a lot of my notes on it that weren't backed up to the cloud. So if I can remember what I wanted to do with their projectiles, then that's something that we'll end up doing in the future, probably in the next patch. But for now, they do exactly what you would expect. Everything written on the tin that a trebuchet does, this trebuchet, catapult, and ballista will do in tandem together. So that's going to do. I'm going to focus in on these guys here so you can take a good look at them. And we're going to go ahead and read the chat. For the Slingers, Loki, congrats on the new release. Can't wait for the campaign. Thank you so much, George. Camel, what's with the Medieval 3 music? It's something that doesn't get me demonetized. So, I'm sorry if you don't like it, but that's too bad. I love the purple trim on the Kinsman of Ingwe. Yeah, I went for that sort of regal purple mixed with gold. It sort of made sense to me with what they were conceptually. The Bulldogs and Angband are technically Maiar. Yes, they are Maiar, but they are not Valinor Maiar. They are Fallen Maiar, which means they're just simply less powerful than Maiar, who have remained faithful to the Valar and have been living in the Blessed Realm since time immemorial. Will Maiar units each be their own type of unit? Will one be a shock infantry and another be an archer unit? I don't know about those two particular types, but I can guarantee you that some of them are going to be fucking weird. Obviously, there is a lot of biblical overtones in the Silmarillion and in the design of the units that we've presented so far. I want to do some real Old Testament shit, so I want to have like a chariot unit. It's a self-powered chariot unit that is itself a Maiar and is covered in like eyes and like fire and stuff. That's some of the things you will see from the Maiar, because they are shape changers. They take human form mostly for the benefit of the children of Iluvatar, but there's no reason that they can't do crazy things. Balrog are Maiar, right? Ungoliant was a Maiar. All they are is spirits that exist before the world of Arda that all of the setting takes place in. So you're going to see some weird stuff. There will likely be some very large Ent units and stuff like that for Yavanna, since they are kind of her children. And it makes sense to me that her servitors would take those forms to honor her and to honor her creations. But you're going to see some weird stuff. So like the Galgalin of Ulmo, that's going to be the chariot unit. That's like a self-powered kind of chariot, and it's like a reference to the Bible, but also a reference to Poseidon's chariot. So there's gonna be some weird stuff. So stay tuned for that. But that's gonna do for Valinor, which I believe brings us into our final faction. And that is, of course, gonna be the dwarves, isn't it? The faction everyone's been waiting for. I'd be lying if I said I didn't deliberately keep you waiting this long to see the dwarves. And we will appropriately go on the dwarf road. Currently, the logo there is a work in progress. Obviously, we're still using the reforged one just so we have a logo. But White will be making a new one eventually. Now, the thing to note with the dwarves is that they are currently unfinished in that they are missing things from their roster. When we had originally attempted to set out to do this patch, it wasn't intended for the dwarves to be in it at all. I ended up being given a lot of assets from a lot of different people, and so we've put those together and made our dwarven faction. But they are still kind of a work in progress, conceptually and in terms of their roster. But nonetheless, they are still pretty cool. They work well enough. But that's just something to note, is that they're not finished, but you ended up getting more dwarves than you would have otherwise gotten in this patch, because I had so much stuff turned into me all at the same time. Have these guys here. We'll have... Where's my crossbows? There they are. We're missing someone? I feel like we're missing someone. Yeah, we are. We're missing the engineers. Alright, well, let's start with the sort of mainline mid-tiers. And we'll talk a little bit about the dwarves and why they are the way they are currently. So one of the things that when I set out to do with the dwarves, so I didn't want them to just be your bog standard dwarven faction, and whether or not I've succeeded in doing this is certainly up for debate. But it is the intention behind a lot of things that you're going to see here, and I wanted to make them a little bit more micro heavy if I could, and one of my ideas to try and innovate in that regard was to make a lot of their supporting units detachments. So their price obviously reflects that. Their caps are quite large, so you can bring quite a lot of them, depending on what your needs are. But overall, you do have a lot more flexibility with the detachments and how you decide to spread out your fire. But whether or not I was entirely successful, I'm not quite sure at this point. But in any case, so we're going to take a look here at the Arbalists of Belegost. They've got a decent enough armor value of 9, as you would expect. It's like a heavy infantry armor value. Defense skill is quite low on the dwarves. That's one of the things that they don't have in abundance that a lot of other factions have. They very heavily rely on their armor and their shields. And that's partially thematic and also partially practical, because you can't combine high melee defense with high armor and high skill, or high melee defense with high armor and high shield value, and still have a unit that's balanced. You just can't. So something has to give somewhere, and so the thematic solution is, of course, to make the dwarves much more reliant on armor. So that's what you're seeing here today. They do exactly what you'd expect them to do. They've got a little bit better damage, I think, on their missile attack than other crossbow units, which I think is appropriate. They've got good range. I think they come in at about 140, so it's around the same as slingers, lower than archers, so it's a good place for them to be. And yeah, you can bring a decent amount of them. This is probably one of the better skirmishers currently in the faction. Beautiful models there done by White in the Dark Cloud, and that's going to hold true for most of the units that you're going to see today. Next we have the Iron Halberdiers. Currently we're working on getting some new animations and stuff for them, but some of the cooler things about them is that they are one of the only shielded halberds. In fact, I think the only shielded halberd. Certainly the one that has a shield on the model. and they can do a lot of damage. Of course, they're a halberd unit. They've got slashing. They've got high damage. They've got spear wall, which is an amazing force multiplier. Yeah, they do what you'd expect from halberds, and they've got a decent amount of numbers to boot. I think you can bring 3 of them currently in multiplayer. Next, we move on to the Iron Guardsmen. And they have really good attack values for being a quite cheap mid-tier unit. So they've got 12 attack, a big charge bonus of 8. And that's something to note about the dwarves is that most of them have really high charge bonuses. They also have very high charge distances. They're natural sprinters, if you would like. That was the intention behind it. They've got good shield value of 7. High armor values of 11. You can upgrade them once to bring them up to 13, and they of course have the low skill values as well. Let's move on to some of our other mid-tier units. This is more of the supporting line from the Dwarves of Novgorod. So we have the Belagos units over there, and now we have the Dwarves of Novgorod with their own unique appearance. Now the Beast Hunters, one of the people asked earlier in the chat about, how are the dwarves going to deal with cavalry or with monsters? Well, this is one of their solutions, sort of similar to the other. I believe they're also called beast hunters in Nandangortha. I really need to up my naming game, obviously. They've got really high bonuses against cavalry. They've also got spear bonuses on top of that. They've got good numbers. They've got a high charge value. They've got good attack. These are units that can really damage cavalry and large units and things like that. So it's not something that you want to play around with. You can bring them in fairly high numbers. That being said, I think you can still upgrade their armor. I might be wrong on that, but they don't have amazing armor values, but their defense skill is obviously a little bit higher. So most of the Dwarven units we've seen so far have like 5 melee defense or something like that, right? Whereas the Beast Hunters of Novgorod come in at 6. So they're a little bit better at it. I've also heard it said that they're decent at clearing out chaff, which doesn't surprise me because they have really high attack values. But they don't stay alive for very long, but that's kind of okay. Next up, we have the Axe Throwers of Novgorod. Currently, their animation needs a little bit of work. Like I said, dwarves are a work in progress here. But we've compensated for that by giving them a massive missile attack. So they will throw less missiles, but they will also hurt more when they throw those missiles. We've got okay melee attack of 9, not a super great charge bonus, and overall lower stats from that of the Beast Hunters. But yeah, they're axe throwers. They do what you'd expect. Miners of Novgorod are a little bit more interesting. I think you can upgrade their armor, so you can put them up to 9. They got a defense skill of 4, shield value of 7, and their missile is particularly interesting. So they've got a little bit less range than harassment javelins, but they've got more damage, a little bit less ammunition, but their ammunition does cause fear. So you can use them for, say, breaking, wavering, or lower tier units, and sort of keeping the numbers of your enemies as they swarm against you a little bit more manageable, ideally, in any case. But yeah, this is Miners of Novgorod, one of their supporting units. I think you can bring like 4 of them, and you can bring like 4 axe throwers or something. And then you have the Beast Hunters as well, who you can use to sort of fill out your numbers. But let's move on now. Take a look here at some of the high tier units. These ones are actually done by Bill Baraka, and yeah, they're pretty damn cool. So the Vault Wardens here of Tumunzahar, which I believe is the Dwarven word for, I think it's for Novgorod or Belagos or something like that. It is an appropriately chosen term, the meaning of which escapes me at the moment. They are pikemen, and they do all the things that pikemen do. They've got really high armor values of 15. That's one of the highest armor values in the game. Decent enough skill, and as many of the pike units currently have, especially the heavy pike units, they do have a vestigial shield value of 2. So they do exactly what you need them to do. They're pikes, good for supporting your line, and good for kind of spreading out some of your more cavalry and anti-monster ability. Just one sec here, I'm just getting a little phone call if you don't mind me taking a look. Just one sec here. Just getting a notification from work. We'll get into this in a minute. Stone Heroes of Tumunzahar, two-handed axemen. They do exactly what you'd expect them to do. Their price reflects the fact that they are also a detachment. The idea here being that you don't have to commit as many resources to certain areas of your battle line. You can send these guys on deep flanking missions and things like that, and not have to worry as much about them. But you do need to balance the number of unit cards that you have in your army. Obviously, you're only allowed to take about 20 or so. So you need to kind of focus and maybe not spread yourself too thin. That being said, they do a lot of damage. It's all armor piercing. They've got deadly charge bonuses, really high armor. 16 armor is nothing to laugh at. They've got defense skill of 7, so one of the higher defensive skills in the game as well. Overall, good at what they do. And what they do is to be cheap and bring a little bit of damage to where you kind of end up needing it most. Over here, we have the High Thanes of the Halls of Pearl. They are currently relentless. They've got really high shield value of 10. They can also upgrade their armor twice, so you can take them from 14 to 18, which is enormous. They will cause fear as well to nearby enemy infantry, as they are equipped with those fearsome dwarven war masks. They will also inspire your troops. This is currently your only general's bodyguard pick, and they kind of do it all at the moment. Everything that you need from a general's bodyguard, these guys will do. And of course, they hit like trains as well. 20 base damage. Yeah, not something that you want to play around with. Now we get to look at some of the other, well, another Dwarven high tier, but also the Legendary Company as well, but we'll get to them. So we have the Dragon Slayers of Ajagal in just a moment here. So they're going to come in with a massive shield value of 9, defense skill of 4. They have 7 armor, but you can boost that up to 9, which will bring them into that heavy infantry territory. The big things about them is that they have bonuses against, you guessed it, elephants, and dragons are, of course, elephant classed. They've got armor piercing as well, and yeah, they do what you would kind of expect them to do. They get bonuses in snow and in deserts, the sort of places that you would find dragons in Middle-earth, and they may also occasionally charge without orders, but that's alright. One of the things to note about all of these Dwarven units as well is they all have perfect stamina. So you can run them around, you can do whatever you want with them for extended periods of time, and they will not tire. They are a very, very hardy people. Next, we move on here to the Brotherhood of the Silvered Hammer. Now, this is the Legendary Company for the Dwarven faction. I believe a lot of the assets used were from both Bill Baraka and the Cowering Coma, so big thank you to both of them for helping get this unit off the ground. Total defense is obviously massive, and they're one of the only Dwarven shield or infantry units to have a melee defense value of higher than 7. In fact, they come in at a massive 16. So what the idea behind them is that they are sort of an expeditionary force sent from Khazad-dûm, who have their own philosophies towards training their troops and waging war. They are, of course, armed with mithril, which allows these units to have heavy armor, but also allows them to use light infantry bonuses for melee defense and for speed as well. So they are very, very quick. They're the second fastest Dwarven unit on the roster. And of course, they have that wonderful melee defense, a value of 16. They can also upgrade their armor to 11, but they are lacking in a shield. So there is a little bit of a trade-off there. And they can, of course, frighten nearby enemy infantry. I think there are one of maybe 2 or I think it's just like 2 Dwarven units that are able to cause fear. In any case, moving on now, because they all sort of have these war masks. If you're wondering why that is, well, now you know. Now you know. Moving on to the but certainly the final Dwarven unit. We actually borrowed this chariot mount and the goats here from Reforged, just because we haven't had time to make the mobile artillery platform that we want to have eventually. White in the Dark Cloud, I believe, will be taking the lead on that, and yeah, that will be done at a later date. But I wanted to get the unit into the game so we could sort of test, like, you know, proof of concept of it. And yeah, let's talk a little bit about that right now. The Iron Legion Engineers. They have body-piercing arrows. They've got a fairly low missile attack. Their accuracy is not bad. Pretty good for punishing elephant units like, say, the war dogs from Nandangortha or large blobs of lighter infantry. They've also got a minor bonus against cavalry, but they're not super mass heavy because they're not really intended to be a melee chariot. So they can get bogged down by other cavalry. They're not extremely fast either, so they can get caught out. So it's a nice little supporting engine that doesn't just allow you to kind of scoot and shoot forever and drive people insane. It is something that you want to use to support the rest of your line, because if it can be isolated, it likely will by anything quick enough, and most things will be quick enough. That being said, decent amount of HP, it's got good armor, and it's got good defense as well, so it's not super easy to bring down, and like I said, it does have some bonuses against cavalry, so it's not completely helpless. But yeah, it's good at what it does. It's good at what it does, and there's a decent number of them, and I think each one of these has like 4 or 5 guys on it, so it's a fair amount of firepower. You can potentially bring a second one. It's not totally out of the question, but it will cost you, I think, about 2,000 or so gold. And change, maybe about 2,100, 2,200 or so. Yeah, so that is going to be the Dwarven faction as it stands right now. It will be getting at least 2 more units for multiplayer, but one of the things to note about all of the factions that I've shown you so far is that these are the multiplayer rosters. Multiplayer will be a very different beast. We've spent a lot of time testing it and refining it and getting it to a point where it's fun and I think really, well, fairly balanced. I think it's pretty balanced, but everyone's going to have a different take on that. But all of the factions do something. They do something well. Yeah, the multiplayer is pretty damn good right now, and that's what we've really focused on over the last couple of years. We've got to a point where I think it's razor sharp. So next, that means campaign. And we could kind of start our campaign discussion here a little bit, I think. A lot of these factions will have a lot of mercenaries available to them. Mercenaries are going to be a huge part of how you play your campaign and you equip your armies, because your recruitment for most factions, Morgoth isn't as affected by this, neither is Tolengauroth or Nandangortha, but, well, Nandangortha isn't technically in the campaign as a playable faction, but in any case, it will be harder for you to raise, massive 20 stacks and just doom stack your way to victory just by auto-resolving than it is in, say, Vanilla Third Age or even in DAC. I know that that's an issue that the team has kind of been struggling with, and I think that's something the community has been pointed out, so I feel pretty comfortable pointing it out now, is that there's a lot of stack spam, and you get that ennui, and it just feels like you're pushing a rock up a hill. That will hopefully not be the case in Silmarillion, so Mercenary is going to be a big part of it. End of discussion there. There's going to be a ton of mercs that you can use to supplement these base rosters and add flavor and add customization and all that good stuff. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the chat here. Let's see here. Will each Mire unit be their own? We talked about that one already. Will there also be a Goblin faction within Silmarillion, or will the Goblins be incorporated into other evil factions? Contrary to the films, where they do make a hard distinction between, breeds of orcs, right? There's Gundabad orcs, there's Mordor orcs, there's Uruk-hai, and then there's goblins and whatever. With the exception of black orcs and Uruk-hai, most of those distinctions don't actually exist within the source material. Goblin is just another name for orc. So, to answer your question on a positive note, there will be another orcish faction. You can call them goblins if you like, I won't stop you. But that will be largely centered around Glaurung and his brood, and they will be there to sort of support things. And they will also have chariots, which will be lots of fun. So there will be some other orcish factions, but not anything that's necessarily focuses on what I think are the artificial distinctions made between goblins and orcs in the Hobbit movies, like in the New Line Cinema movies. Don't currently have any plans for that. I'm more interested in sort of playing to the source material and enhancing it where I can with certain additions that I feel are appropriate. But there's not going to be, a goblin faction per se, no. All right. Well, let's go ahead and Yeah, we'll conclude that part of the stream. Now, if you guys have any questions about campaign, I'm just going to take a short break because I need some water, and I've been talking for like probably 2 hours at this point. And I need to take a phone call from work. So I will be back in just a few minutes. We're just going to shut things down temporarily for the time being. And think of some questions that you have for campaign. Doesn't matter what it is. And then pop this into the chat, and I'll address them all when I come back in about 5 or so minutes. All right, I'll see you guys in a bit. There we go. Let me go ahead, drop that off there. I can answer a few questions here. Yeah, it was more like an intervention there, Natabata. I just had a call from work and I needed water because I can only talk for so long without drying out like a prune. Let's see here. Will each campaign have custom events, even those that have less lore to go on? Absolutely. We're all really big fans of the story. Like, I'll say we're fucking nerds, and a lot of us are very purist nerds, and I'm definitely part of that hardline faction. So while I don't want to create things necessarily whole cloth to sort of run contrary to the spirit or the message of the works, where appropriate, so factions like Nandangortha, the Avari, etc., we made up all this like custom lore that seems plausible, then we will absolutely add more lore and more events and things based on that. So we've obviously taken a lot of pains to make sure that all the factions in Silmarillion are in some way unique. They all do something unique, they all have their own unique strengths and weaknesses, and that distinction that exists in multiplayer will be muddled a little bit with the way that rosters will expand. You'll have access to more mercenaries and more tools, etc. So one of the big tools of then bringing that back to the forefront is going to be to tailor experiences for each faction that are unique. So to use Fingolfin as an example, I'm not sure to the extent to which we can push this. This is more something that I have to have a very long chat with our lead campaign developer about, because that's not me. But we want them to focus on vassals and satrapies and things like that. So maybe some of the challenges there could be similar to the way that the Seleucids play in Rome. That's one possibility. Then, of course, all of the factions will have this overarching Silmaril thing. So the more that you fight Angband, the more Silmarils you will acquire from certain areas, because that's the way we wanted to do it, not just having them, on Morgoth's crown, so you only get to interact with Silmarils at the end of the campaign once you've defeated Angband. That didn't seem right to me. So you will be able to acquire them from different places, and the last one will come from Morgoth himself. But that last one will also trigger a sort of Realm Divide event with the Sons of Feanor. So that will be, something else that's sort of overarching. But within the individual campaigns, there are going to be challenges, whether that is recruitment, geography, random events, or a combination of all three. It kind of remains to be defined at the moment, but that is what we're looking at doing. So I want the campaign to be as different and interesting as it is to play each faction in multiplayer. So when you go into a Fingolfin campaign, you have certain challenges that are unique to you as Fingolfin, the same way that you do when you're Fingolfin fighting a Syriand, or whatever it happens to be, right? So yes. Mentioned mercs being a big part of it outside of the orcs, like you mentioned. Are you restricted with what you can hire in a shared pool, i.e. Doriath hiring dwarves? There will be certain things that you can't hire. So, for example, Gondolin won't actually have access. Well, I haven't decided on this for sure, but Gondolin may or may not have access to the House of the Mole. But Angband will get access to the House of the Mole after they conquer Gondolin, because the defectors within the House of the Mole are a big part of that story. But other factions conquering Gondolin might not have access to those mercenaries. Another good example is one of the sub-factions you're going to see with its own unique roster, by the way, so that's something to get excited about. Within the Doriath faction is going to be the Smiths of Aeol. They will have, a handful of units that are unique to them and sort of function as like an part of Doriath, but also sort of apart in the sense that they have their own different military, and they may end up just being a satrapy or like a vassal or something. But a Dwarven faction coming in and conquering that area wouldn't be able to, or not the Dwarves, sorry, a Noldor faction coming in there, because Aeol hates the Noldor, and his people likely share that fiery dislike for the Noldor. A Noldor faction conquering that area wouldn't be able to take advantage of those. Whereas the dwarves coming in, because they have a closer relationship with the dwarves, they might be able to get those elven mercenaries. So it will be this. Feanor wants to know your location. Basically, as soon as you get all three Silmarils, you're like, you're checking in on Snapchat, you're geolocating, and Feanor is like, no, enough is enough. These are mine, and then they come for you full force. So that's a big part of that. But yes, so there will be those elements of the politics and the relationships between the different races, between the different factions within those races, that will affect your mercenary recruitment. There are going to be some other things as well, like geography. You're not going to be able to, recruit cavalry units from a forest, for example. And that will hold true in 90% of cases, with the exception of potentially a Syrian, but also maybe not, because that might be one of their faction sort of challenges, is like, getting access to your mounted units. You need to kind of expand into certain areas, and that might bring you into conflict with the Sons of Feanor. Or maybe you want to go a different route and like forsake that, and then focus more on your infantry and your archers and things like that. And that will affect your campaign. And then you can just recruit mercenaries along the way. It's going to be a choice for you for sure. And we will incentivize you to take different routes at different times, depending on how you want to play and what you want to focus on. So Assyrian with their, I'll give you an example of this. So Assyrian with their current horse roster, maybe in most cases you could do without that and then just double down on your strengths. But I want to add more units that are mounted, that are Assyrian specific, that might incentivize you to take that different path, and maybe that'll bring you into conflict with the Sons of Feanor. And then you get those complex intersections of alliances that are going to, hopefully, in theory, on paper anyway, ensure that you have a different experience every time that you play, or that you have a lot of replayability value at the very least. So yeah, it will be complicated. There's some other things as well. I will reiterate this. I've gone over this on stream before, but I will reiterate one of the other recruitment things, just because mercs play a part of this. So it's important to understand the way that those two systems kind of butt up against each other. So iron will be a thing. I will be using regional resources. Iron is one of them, and certain settlements will have iron, certain places won't. The places that have iron will give you access to tech trees that allow you to build more advanced military units, whereas other places are going to be better suited for just like light garrisons of militia, and you will have garrison scripts, and you will have other units nearby that you can recruit to sort of supplement this, but you won't get those tech trees, but you will get the more developmentally focused ones, a lot more cultural buildings and things like that. So you have to choose where you expand and how you expand, and all of that becomes really important. And that is going to affect the choices that you make and the alliances that you make. And that's something that we'll be paying a lot of attention to, isn't that, yes, we want to incentivize people to move into different areas of mercs and other recruitment options, but we also don't want to railroad them by putting iron in certain areas, because then you have to go through there. So initially with the first pass, it will be big major settlements that will be really important. So a lot of your starting cities, like your big starting cities, will have iron, and then like important places in the lore will have it. But then we're going to take a look at how people play around that, and then we'll adjust things kind of accordingly, so that you're not feeling like you're railroaded into one thing, that you can branch off, you can do what you want to do, because that's one of the highlights of Total War. So all in all, the Merc faction, or the Merc recruitment system, the Iron recruitment system, those two things playing together, it's sort of our way of trying to address a lot of that mid-game ennui, where like you're at a point where you feel like you're going to win the campaign, but it's too tedious to keep going and fighting the same battle over and over again with endless stacks of troops that you don't care about. This is our way of trying to address that by, making mercenaries an important part of things, limiting your recruitment with this iron system and with AOR and geography and things like that, so that you care about your troops. You have less of these armies; they're not so throwaway anymore. And you have lots of customization options through the surrounding areas, but that also drives that gameplay loop, pushing you forward to try and take more territories. And then there's alliances, and there's everything else that comes into that. And so hopefully, it's a nice stew that at the end of the day gives you a really solid campaign experience. That's the hope, in any case. I think that's our only question for campaign so far. Makes me a little bit sad, but that's okay. Let's try and get a game going. Hopefully mine, you should all be playing. I uploaded my build, so hopefully we're all playing kind of on the same thing. We'll go ahead and we'll host a public lobby here. So if you guys currently aren't aware, somehow, if that's possible, that our new patch has come out, You can download that from the ModDB. Just use the installer. It will kind of sort out most things for most people automatically by installing it to your default Steam directory. And you can come join me on stream. This isn't a test build. This isn't closed or somehow forbidden to you. If you guys want to play, just go download the mod and you're good to go. Okay. First time ever writing this. Silm public stream. What do we want to play? I want to play a map that I made. The Vale of Weaver's Rest. Do it in the morning. I will play... What do I want to play? I feel like I should probably play one of the new factions, so I'll play as Valinor. He left me. Sad face. Oh yeah, that's my name on Steam right now. I don't know why. I thought it was funny. The mid-game thing is a problem in most Total War games, even Medieval 2. You're right, and it's plagued every mod that I've ever played. It's plagued every Total War game that I've ever played outside of some really tightly designed modded campaigns. SFO is pretty good for Warhammer about kind of dealing with that up to a certain point, because eventually you snowball anyway. And I imagine that the same will be true with Silmarillion, but I want to get to the point where most of your experience is going to be challenging from start to finish. And then of course we have those end game events, right? So Angband's going to have the War of Wrath to deal with. Everyone else is going to have Angband, Toland, Gauderhoth, and yeah, those two are the two Orcish factions. They'll have the War of Wrath to deal with. So by the time that they get to the end game and they have this big empire, there's still something else to challenge them to finish the campaign. And then if for everyone else, you beat Angband, but that's really only like the halfway mark, because now you've got the Sons of Feanor to deal with. And we'll find ways through scripts, possibly spawning armies. I don't really like spawning armies because it feels a little bit like gamey, but that will probably be an aspect of it, just to give them a little bit of a boost so they are challenging. So then you of course have this big army that's coming for you. And if you're Doriath, that will be thematic. If you're the Falas, that will be, part of an actual event. And we may also have big events throughout the campaign, such as various battles taking place at the Nir Naiath, the Nir Naiath, so outside of Angband. So you'll have these big battles of Beleriand, because the campaign will start, I believe, around the time of the outbreak of the Dagor Bragalach. So the Battle of Sudden Flame. So there's other battles after that will take place, and things like that. And plus anything else that we decide to make up along the way. Sorry I'm late to the party, so I'll keep the questions to a minimum. Is campaign relatively good to roll? Campaign currently not available. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Brian Moran. I was actually just talking about campaign and our philosophy towards it, so that might be something that if campaign interests you, you'll probably want to rewatch, the end of the stream a little bit later before we start the multiplayer battles, because I go into a lot of detail there about what we're doing, why it's important, and how we want to accomplish our goals. So it's not currently available yet. That being said, I am working with one of the testers to create a single player sort of narrative scenario line that's sort of like a what if thing. And that will be released on the ModDB, so if you want to play that, then you'll be able to play, through this sort of curated experience, one scenario at a time, and they will all be quite challenging and on unique maps and stuff like that. What event does Feanor get in the campaign once they have all 3 Silmarils? I haven't figured that out yet, but I have a few ideas, but I don't want to discuss them right now just because I don't have anything concrete. Let me see if we can get a 2v2 going. See if I can pull in some of our testers here. Will there be unique buildings, and will there be unique buildings that you can build after conquering X settlement? As X faction, yes. Yes, there will be. There's going to be a bunch of culture buildings. We will be using the engine overhaul project, so we are actually able to expand our horizons into, you know, unknown territory in terms of what you've seen done in campaigns previously, Lander. So we're going to have lots of unique cultures, lots of unique building chains, and there's going to be a ton. It's a huge undertaking. It's going to take us probably another year at the very least to get to a good place. I would say at least 6 months to try and get the sandbox good and ready to go. There's some other big things as well. One of the other major innovations that we're planning on playing around with is tiered sieges. So instead of, you know, taking Gondolin in one battle, you'll have to, and map geography will funnel you into this through like impassable areas. You'll have to, you know, take the gates of Gondolin, then you have to take the marketplace, then the Tower of the King, that kind of thing. So that taking a big place like Angband isn't just like one and done, it's an undertaking. It's something that you have to plan for, and will be hard for you to do because there will be garrison scripts in here as well. So you're gonna, if you want to take Angband, you got to come at Angband, you know, hard, right? And you gotta be willing to sacrifice a lot in order to achieve those goals. And like I said, armies are harder to come by, so it is a daunting prospect. Something that's going to take you, you know, many turns to kind of work up to. Hopefully not too many. I don't want to just make it ridiculously hard to the point where it's insurmountable, but that is something that we're thinking about. Oh, cool. Got enough people here. Perfect. So Valinor, Assyrian versus Finarfin Angband. Ooh, it's an interesting one. Yeah, adepts are a good pick for that. That might work. It might be really shit too. We'll try that. It might be terrible. They might blow us to pieces. They can go pretty artillery heavy, but whatever. We're here to have fun. Yeah, let's go for it. Haven't seen your sons in action, so it'll be interesting. They're actually really amazing. I was saying earlier in the stream that when we first implemented the dwarves, there was some like holdover stats that basically made them like almost unstoppable meat grinders in melee, and the toolcast adepts were instrumental in actually beating them when they were in that like sort of broken, hyper-powered Super Saiyan state. So yeah, they're really good, especially with that relentless. Like they truck through things. Worst part about House of Finarfin has got to be no cavalry. It's one of those things you got to work around, my guy. see here, actually. I probably don't need the horse archers. Yeah, I definitely don't. I might be able to snag a ballista. Or catapult. Let's do that. Probably get more out of the catapult, and then I can give out a couple of armor upgrades. Let's go with that. Time will tell if that was a stupid decision, but we're rolling with it. I also haven't played in a while, so I apologize for what you're about to see. So this is one of the other things that's new with the patch, is all this new foliage and stuff right here that you're seeing. We actually brought that in from Europa Barbarorum, and not only is it beautiful, it is also lossless, so you don't, like, take a hit to your frame rate. It's the exact same as the old trees, it just works better. It's literally a win all around. Let me think here. What are some of the other things we can expect in the future? So listening to this really awesome music has made me think of the fact that I have several composers on the team. So we will be getting some custom-made music, which for those of you out there interested in doing like content, like for YouTube and whatever, that's actually really huge because it means that you're not going to be getting hit with the stupid copyright takedown orders and like whatever, right? Let's see here. And it also means that we're going to have stuff tailored to the experiences that we want to draft, so that's really exciting. Make them one. Oops. Now, if you're wondering why I'm spreading them out, because they can go super artillery heavy, which can be a pain in the ass. Nobody likes that. Protect that with our cavalry. Some stakes, which we'll put down there eventually. Yeah, that'll do, pig. One or brother will dispatch the assassins if one note of Howard Shore is detected. You're not fucking kidding, man. I've been making content on YouTube for probably a good 10, 11 years. I think I started when I was 25. I'm now 32. Maybe that's, my math is terrible. That's more like 7 years. But still, it feels like 10 or 11 years because of all the damn copyright notices that I get every time it happens. Adds a new gray hair to my head. Go ahead and we'll start it. Main menu is dangerous for real, but thankfully you won't have to deal with that because we will have we'll have our own music, our own literally everything. So there will be no pesky copyright takedown orders. Let's see where my allies at. Who am I playing with? Dead Salmon, I believe. Yeah. Take a look at the Assyrian army. Didn't really have a chance to look at them on stream today. They will be getting some new reskins as well. These ones I think are starters from when we first began the faction. So a lot of the Rathloriel units the ones out here in front with like the bronze or like brown mail, they will be getting some new, some facelifts, basically an overhaul in the near future. Got some rangers here, one of the few body piercing units. The Red Durham ain't nothing to sneeze at. There's a crap ton of spears. These are all harassment javelin units, so they can put a lot of pain downfield. The rest of it, it's a mystery, Scooby and gang, because they could have literally brought anything. I can guarantee you there's a ton of hidden stuff hanging around there. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away his composition, because I'm sure people are on stream who are also playing. It's fine, I don't care. But I don't want to ruin my allies' day. Okay, let's see what we're rolling with. Oof. It's a big scary army. Let me see here. Oh, my friend has definitely played Angband before. He's been watching the streams. This is very similar to a lot of the comps that I've seen players play in tournaments and things like that. Finarfin's got a pretty strong position there. That's gonna be a lot of skirmishing for a very long time. Only one hit there, eh? That's okay. The thing we want to focus on is the halberdiers, because that's what I don't really have an answer to at the moment. I didn't bring any of my Valinor two-handed spears. Open up some skirmishing here and try and deal with those iron shot arbalists while bombarding his first and second lines, try and thin him out a little bit. This is going to be difficult to deal with because I just don't have the numbers, and he could swamp me if he wanted to. We'll let them exchange that ammo, because I'm okay with that. These archers are really just there to fight the crossbows anyway. Nice. Ugly. Love that. Able to thin them out a little bit. Yeah, they're gonna take damage from that, but... Oh no! I didn't realize that Finarfin had... Oh, that's so horrifying. There's really not a ton I can do about this. Can... bring these guys back a little bit. Reform the line here a little bit farther back. Here, and we're going to plant it right there because it can be disruptive for advances. We'll keep these guys out here for now. Just while that catapult is still active. Yeah, let him come forward a bit. This might expedite this a little bit. Keep an eye out for that cav or trolls or something though. Combined arms there. What's going on elsewhere here? Looks like a lot of those wolf riders are oot and a boot. Bring them over here and try and support our ally if we can. We're gonna make a choice. Right, we'll let them keep shooting and doing their thing. Keep these guys here. Same with them. Grieving Suns are gonna keep way the fuck back, because they will melt to Archer Fire. He's covering his advance here really nicely, actually. Yeah, I think he's definitely played before, which is cool. Or he's learned a lot of things from watching like UMET's videos or whatever. Worse tournament coverage and streams, but yeah, definitely not a newbie here, which is nice. Where are these guys? A little bit of a mistake there we might be able to punish a bit. Okay, well. Why this can be punishing is because he's in a bit of a column here, so we're gonna have a better shot. Yeah. Ooh, no, you're doing great. Continue doing what you're doing. I want you guys to come out here. What's going on elsewhere on the field here? Looks like Assyrians pushing pretty hard up there. There's a big old Finarfin box. But they're doing pretty well at breaking it down. So what he might do, yeah, double down to try and come up the center here. That's why I moved some troops over here, so we have, you know, at least a presence. But yeah. Bring all these guys forward here. Here. Bring these guys over here together. Shit. Yep. Definitely what I want to focus on here. Bring these guys back behind. Seems like a good place for them to be. These are Spear Guard. They'll sit there forever and fight. There, get some cav over here now that that anti-cavalry threat's been kind of neutralized. We're doing the front lines. Not super great. Also not terrible. We've got some relentless units sort of spread here throughout the line. Probably have some archers or something out here. How's that going over there? They seem to be doing okay. Oh, that's not good. We must help his men avenge him. Draw these guys back here. Redirect that fire to these halberds if we can. It's not looking good for us though. unless we can free some of our resources up. Gonna let us bring a lot of pressure over onto this side. Go. They turned around. Get a nice little cheeky charge there. Is that a ballista?
Our foolish general has thrown his life away.
That's bad news.
That's our chances of victory with it.
Go. Rout some of those troops at least. Sure that these spearmen don't come back, because otherwise they definitely will.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
Tormentors and stuff over there. It's going to open up the back lines a little bit for us. It's a nice counter charge there, but at least we kept it busy so we could hit the legionaries on the other side, thin out some of that chaff. Go, make them turn around. Pressuring his back line is maybe what might win this for us. We'll see. Syrian, I think, is going to need some help. Let's see if we can get over here and give them a hand. Might be able to kind of mash them in here. Go. Got a nice little cinematic charge there. That'll take a big bite out of those swordsmen. Like I've discussed it a little bit,
only half
but
the enemy force
melee
remains.
defense is really big in this, and charges from the rear will basically do away with that. Will do away with the majority of your defense. That's very much by design to promote things like this, you know? Syrian might actually lose this one here. We're going to be in bad shape. I think the army here is starting to, or his army is starting to kind of fall to bits. Get in there, get those arbalists. Chase them, because you will chase them into stakes. There we go. Get rid of those wretches. Wolf Riders, there's not enough of them to stop my knights. Get over here and put an end to this fight. Trolls are there too. Pull out of that. Nice. Very nicely done there, supporting the wargs. Really just need to get my cav out of there, so I can get my own cav charge off. There to put an end to them. And looks like we managed to kill off some of those trolls with a cheeky charge from the rear. Let's see how our ally is doing. Oof, yeah, we need to get over there. Otherwise he's gonna fall apart. See what he's after. Go. Make them turn around. Just kill the Angband general. Nicely done. Pulling out there, using the mass of those units. Very smart. Good knowledge of game mechanics as well. Cav over here and let them rest a bit. I was hoping that would be enough. There we go. Now they'll route. Alrighty.
Our allies have fled the field like cowards. Our men have slain the enemy general.
Oh, that's a good
Without
sign.
him, his troops will lose their will to fight.
Oof, everyone needs to get in here. Let him charge. I might lose this one, just outright. Oh shit, these Bridgeports are actually routing. some routing. Yeah, I think we might be doomed here. Unfortunately, Assyrian was not able to do the damage that needed to be done there. Oh no, Iron Shot Ravagers. Yeah, we're fucked. Where did they come from? Oh, it's disastrous. Maybe we could have pulled this off, but no, I don't think so. Come on, boys, you can't stay in there for that long.
Pray something changes in the course of battle, for defeat seems almost certain.
Yeah, my sentinels, it's all on the verge of breaking because I lost my gen. Some pathfinding here is gonna kill us too. Can't get the last critical charge off. Fuck you. Just do it. Oh man, good game though. That was close. Get rid of those Iron Shot Ravagers if I get out of there quick enough. Spare my cavalry. My cavalry actually wants to listen. I sometimes wonder if your cavalry, if like units are less responsive when you lose your general. It kind of makes sense. It would also be kind of a cool mechanic that you then have to like kind of figure out. Homie, that is not where you were told to charge. What the fuck? There we go. Okay. Explain yourself, America! See, now they've just flubbed it. They've fucking flubbed it. Useless goobers. Look at these fucking idiots. It's amazing. Got some troops are back. Come here, you stupid warg. Oh man, I told you to go the other direction. Something is up with the pathfinding between these two objects here. That's for damn sure. They literally, there's nothing that I can do to get through there because they're just so dumb. Love you, AI. Get you DOA. Toolcast, the Death's still fighting. That was a good game though. What does that come down to? 95, 89? Yeah, damn close. Well done, guys. Well done. We'll admit defeat there.
Though defeat is ours on this day, we have nothing to be ashamed of. It was but a cruel turn of fate that snatched victory from our grasp.
Grieving grandson's wedding. That's awesome. We did pretty well there. 2,500. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough matchup when you're playing a Sea of the End against Finarfin. There's only so much you can do without the boxing. With the boxing, unless you've got like artillery and you're like super prepared for it. And it's like, it's a hard fight even then. So Dead 7 did as well as I think he could have done there. We'll go ahead and we will save that. post that on the channel a little bit later. Let's take a look and see what did what. Adepts of Toolcast. I hope Castellan's still in the comments there, because yeah, that's very impressive. They like... Yeah, they like... It's like 6-1, man. They did work against Angband there. Knights of Tyrion did well. Swan Guard of Alqualande did shite, but that's what they're kind of there to do. Sentinels of Tyrion. Look at those numbers. I told you. They can do some serious work. Grieving Sons did not bad. They were important for the other side because we were dealing with the Ravagers, and they kind of thwart the AP and the charge really nicely. Mariners did pretty well. Sentries of Alqualande did blah, blah. The Catapult actually didn't do too bad as well. All things considered, that was a damn good game. This is a little misleading. I don't think he... Oh man, he did have those unit Ravagers at the end. That fucking surprised me. I have no idea where they came from, but like... Definitely held those back until like the 11th hour. That's awesome. Alrighty. Well, that's gonna do for the stream today. Let's see if we have anything. My dude, that is literally my first donation. Thank you, Football and FIFA. I have never gotten a donation on this channel before, and I now have 5.5 pounds. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it. Yeah, he had to fight the Troll Guard and Finarfin. You know what, Dead Salmon? That's probably my bad. I didn't even realize that's where all the Troll Guard were. I did send some help with the cavalry, but I kind of thought you had it, but I should have helped you more. That might have swung the battle right there. Like that might actually be my bad that we lost. How's it going, Camo? Welcome to the stream, man. It's a shame that you got here right at the end because it's 1 o'clock. I've been streaming since 10. I do need to have a break, and yeah, I have some other stuff I gotta do today. Got some schoolwork and whatever. Main menu is dangerous. Let's see if I missed anything else. No, that's everything. Thank you so much, Football and FIFA. And thank you so much to everybody for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the stream so far. I hope you found it. Yeah, the ends are fucking badass. I hope you guys found the stream like useful, enjoyable. I hope you have a better sense of kind of where we want to go with campaign and how the factions are meant to interact with one another and just all of that stuff. Hopefully it was quite useful for you, and I look forward to our next stream. I don't know when that's going to be. I'll be honest with you guys. I don't have as much time for doing YouTube and development as I used to because I'm working 40 hours and I'm going to school full time. So hopefully the next one can be at the end of I have some time off over the next few days, so I'm going to try and get maybe another video up tomorrow or potentially another stream. I will let you guys know by the middle of today. Or rather, by the end of today, since it's already 1 o'clock. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it so far. I will see you next time. If you guys want to get more games in, check out the Discord. I will actually put a link to our Discord right now. We've got a bunch of post-launch events and stuff planned. There's actually if you're hungry for a campaign and you don't mind a little bit of multiplayer, there is actually a RP campaign going on. You can find the links for that and stuff on our Discord. I'm going to pop that in there. I will be previewing a bunch of new sub-faction units for Dorthonion, which is going to be related to the Finarfin faction. That'll be in our mod DB, and I think they might already be up on the Discord. I will have some post-launch support in the form of new maps, a narrative campaign that I'm working on. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier. And I will try to get to the rest of the tournament replays from our winter tournament as well. So in any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you're excited.